So, if you're just looking for a recommendation, is this game worth my time? Is Chrono fucking Trigger worth playing? Of course it is, it's in the name, it's Chrono fucking, that's a part of the title, Trigger. You try not to come, but you will come, over and over again. And you're still gonna be hard.
Maybe that's too gross, but it's Chrono Trigger. If you don't like this game, then there is something wrong with you. I'm convinced if this doesn't do it for you, then I don't know what can. It was the culmination of Squaresoft's entire generation of RPG innovation. They brought in the guys who made Dragon Quest, the guys who made Final Fantasy, and the guy who invented Dragon Ball. Yeah, whatever, you know the story. I'm not the freaking gaming historian. I'm here to tell you in meticulous detail how stupid awesome this game is. When I started playing all these Super Nintendo RPGs, I thought I would find something else, at least approaching these levels of awesomeness, but no, it hasn't happened. Nothing can touch Chrono Trigger. Its structure and design are just head and shoulders above anything that existed, and even really anything else which would exist going forward. And it doesn't waste any gosh darn time. The opening of this game, before you even hit a button, plays a little trailer, which is like a collage of all the most visually interesting moments in the game. Some might call them spoilers, but breadth of context, it's just a bunch of cool visuals or things to look forward to. When these events happen in the game, my kid self was pointing at the screen like that meme. Perfect to play on loop at rental stores, to put on promotional VHS tapes, to drool over at your friend's house because he has Chrono Trigger and you do not.
So this intro gets you pumped, you're excited, you're psyched up, you want to run through a freaking wall and play some Chrono Trigger. Well, let's take a minute to compare that to the other Squaresoft masterpiece on the system, Final Fantasy III.
It just plays the first few minutes of the game. Sure, it's mysterious, a little depressing, but also beautiful. And herein is the contrast. Final Fantasy VI is a depressing game about a cartoon clown, while Chrono Trigger is a lighthearted, upbeat one about the inevitable cosmic end of humanity. The adventure is incredibly playful, but the stakes, its substance, and commitment to always thoughtful game design is not. Chrono Trigger goes to great lengths and uses incredibly painstaking attention to detail to make itself feel effortless. Shout out to Frank, save file on the cartridge I bought, max level. Other games I've reviewed, there aren't even save files on the cartridge, or some schmuck played for 5 minutes one time. But not here. This is Chrono fucking Trigger, and the cartridge is well loved. Picking active because who the heck under any circumstances would ever want to wait? And as soon as the game starts, I just have to gush. I absolutely love the opening of this game. The first shot of balloons being fired off from this really eye-catching location on the map, already cementing this as the primary place of interest. Then your bitch mom nags you out of bed. Nah, just kidding. Your mom's actually pretty cool. Lets you sleep in the only bed in the house. Even gives you money if you ask. She's talking about some kind of fair. Oh, you mean like the place I just saw with the balloons? Then warns you to behave yourself today. Chrono Trigger loves foreshadowing. It's like its favorite thing. Before you can even move your character around, your mom brings up Leanie's Bell, an important tchotchke, the Millennial Fair, and of course I want you to behave yourself today, which is very on the nose and cheeky. Of course, this is a real warning for the courtroom scene later, and it's just one line. That wouldn't mean anything the first time playing, but on every repeat playthrough, you're gonna smack yourself on the forehead. Immediately, right off the bat, this is a more open and interactable world than what we would typically see in an RPG. In Final Fantasy, everyone moves on a stupid grid, and sometimes NPCs will straight up block your path, like, excuse, I'm just trying to, can you fucking move? You can try to interact with stuff, but most of the time, nothing happens. Best case scenario, a text box appears and you get a potion or a You get a what? What did I get? But Chrono Trigger doesn't have any of that. You can move in all directions, you can talk to the cat, you can close the curtains, you can speak to someone and just run away before they're even finished. Can you do that in Paladin's Quest, Breath of Fire, Fire Emblem, Tactics Ogre, 7th Saga? No! but you can do it here, and you can also do it in Ultima Runes of Virtue, so who is the real trailblazer? I love how Chrono just kind of kicks down doors if you slam into them at full speed. Just something about this freaking yeah, you just like sprint into a door and it slams open. I love it. All this may sound simple and unimportant, like, seriously, why does it matter if you're tied to a grid or if you can move in all directions? But with this one simple trick, Chrono Trigger doesn't seem as stiff and rigid as JRPGs always did. This is true with both its movement and, if we take a step back, the overall game design. Your party controlling a lot more like Secret of Mana, which is an action game, was such a liberating choice. Anyway, this intro bit to the whole game, this entire starting out in 1000 AD is genius because it has already set up a natural funnel as to where you were supposed to go. The fair is already visible as soon as you leave your house. Your mom said you were excited to go. It was the first thing we saw. There were balloons coming out of it. It's the most interesting thing on the map. There's pretty much flashing flame text signs at this point to go to the fair. But if you can't take the hint, or you just feel like exploring, or if you were just really stupid and missed all these signs, there are so many optional things. Doodads, world building, foreshadowing, if you just walk around and talk to people. The first time booting this game up in many years, I decided to time exactly how long it takes me to go from gaining control of Chrono to actually progressing with the plot. And the answer was 1 minute and 32 seconds. If you already know what you are doing, you can be done with this entire intro bit in 1.5 minutes. Fun fact, as I learned in this playthrough, you don't even have to go into the telepod yourself. You can just tell Luca to go fuck herself while your beautiful blonde baddie mysteriously vanishes.
Oh yeah, and I'm calling her Marley, by the way, and not any other pronunciation, so you better get used to it.
Obviously, with New Game Plus, they wanted to make all this stuff quick, so people who already finished the game can skip the foreplay and tie on the strap-on. Alternatively, if you don't know what you're doing, the game gives new players all of the fixings they could ever want. Tutorials on how battling works, NPCs explaining basic game mechanics, how to run away, which I actually didn't know the first time I played through this. I also didn't know you could save on the world map either, so I did the whole game using save points only, which is actually viable here because there are so many. It's a classic old game design philosophy. I talked about it in my Link to the Past video, where there is a clearly outlined but subtle breadcrumb trail leading the player on to where they're supposed to go. If you follow this path, then you never even get to see the tutorials. But if you don't, then you're guided through the adventure. You're pointed in the right direction, so it's perfect. If the player gets lost in the most obvious section of the game here, every mechanic should be explained out to them. But you don't have to deal with any of it if you just make a beeline towards the next part of the game. The world map also marks a drastic departure from most other RPGs of its ilk because there are no random battles. In fact, there are no encounters on the overworld map in this game at all. Never, not even once. It exists purely to stitch different locations together, and I am all for this. Nobody likes random encounters in the overworld anyway. They're stressful, they de-incentivize exploration, and they're just tedious to deal with. Whenever you're on this screen, you're safe. It's closer to a Mario World map than a Final Fantasy map. If you choose to explore everywhere and engage with everyone, you'll find extensive foreshadowing and lore. People mention the king's tomboy daughter, who of course we meet extremely soon, the kingdom's 1,000-year history, a recent earthquake, of course referring to Lavos. You'll encounter mysterious boxes which you are unable to open, enhanced by this fantastic jingle which adds a perfect punch to accentuate their importance. Imagine how much less impact the sealed by a mysterious force line would have without it. See, it just doesn't hit the same way. We learn that people don't like Luca, our friend that we just named, because her inventions always blow up and fail. And that's another thing I can point out about the overall world of Chrono Trigger, just in this house alone. Everyone has a modern kitchen, like with a fridge and pots and pans and cupboards and stuff in the year 1000 AD. So it's not like our year 1000. It's still a world of magic, kings, and swords. It's a very Dragon Ball-like world with the melding of sci-fi and old Middle Ages. We learn about a mysterious whirlpool someone speaks of in the ocean, which is of course how we get back here after visiting Medina later. This woman wants someone named Fritz to return. That's the guy we free from the guillotine later. There's a ferry you can ride, which might seem pointless because you can just walk to where it goes, but it kind of has a dual purpose. As a result of your time travel shenanigans, you end up fixing the relationship between humans and monsters, and after this ferry also goes to their village, you're allowed to ride it here in the beginning to show the difference, and it's an effective moment when you learn that the ferry can also go to the new place too. But also when you go back to 600 and see the destroyed bridge there, it makes you wish that maybe the ferry had existed back then, and it shows why this ferry may have been more necessary in other time periods. Allowing you to go down to this other continent is like giving you a small tease of what's down there. The real meat is in 600, but you can preview the samples in 1000. The ride also gives you a glimpse of a building that you cannot access yet, which is classic RPG stuff, allowing you to see a building that you can't go into. That's straight out of Dragon Warrior 1. And doing it on a boat, that's straight out of Phantasy Star 3. We learn that some monsters are sentient, like this monkey playing the piano. Of course, we'll see this monkey sprite all over the game. Is it the same character? Who knows? Specchio, the Master of War, is 99% of the time going to be in his monkey form the first time you see him. In fact, you would have to purposefully either starve yourself for experience or comically overlevel for hours in order for him to not be. In fact, I'll bet a lot of you didn't even know that Specchio could be a frog if you get to him at a low enough level. I know I wouldn't have known if I wasn't addicted to this game as a young teenager. What else? There's some asshole selling jerky for 9,900 gold! Holy shit, that's almost as much as beef jerky costs in real life. No, but that seems like a lot of money now, but when we end up needing the jerky later, that's pocket change. Of course, there's that horrible mayor and his family who hates him, who gives you 10 gold to act like a chicken, exactly the ferry price. Again, this is more foreshadowing to when we fix that family's attitude. On the bridge, there are a bunch of people excited for the fair, easily missable because it's not obvious that bridge is an area you can go into. If you walk through the forest, you can fight some mushrooms, or not if you're a gaming god like myself. In Chrono Trigger, every single fight is predetermined. There are no random battles at all. That doesn't mean that they're all avoidable, but a hell of a lot of them are if you know what you're doing. I found that the key most of the time is to go slow. For example, you can just walk past this stupid bird, which normally triggers a battle here, but if you try to sprint, yeah, you're gonna have a bad time. They don't allow you into the door of the castle yet, so there's not much to see there. Oh look, they put your bedroom in this game. Yeah, you watching, this is what it looks like. No, I'm projecting, it's what mine looks like. Here we meet Luca's mom, who is chair-ridden because she's crippled. Even more foreshadowing, you know, to the famous campfire scene. What's crazy is they packed all of this stuff, all of this foreshadowing and expansion of the lore, all of this world building into this tight package at the start of the game, and then try their darndest to funnel you away from all of it. The game obviously wants you to go to the fair straight away, which would mean missing out on everything I just went over. This is one of Chrono Trigger's largest strengths. In many O games, especially back then, if there's a piece of content that exists, the game designers sure as shit make sure you know about it, but Chrono Trigger almost goes out of its way to hide things, just so you can have the joy of discovery on some other New Game Plus playthrough. I don't think there had ever been a game nearly this dense before, with interactions and options you can so easily miss. And yeah, we haven't even gotten to the fair yet, which is just a whole other cornucopia of things to miss. There's an entire other currency which is only used in here. You can ring a bell, bet on races, which you can actually influence by blocking or speeding up the runners, sprint full speed into a running headbutt, and bam! Right in the kissa. Of course, this interaction is being recorded. If you don't speak to Marley first, you lose good boy points for the trial later. You can chug soda against this asshole, which as a kid I thought was impossible, but these days...
You and me, Soda Man, right here, right now, this ends today. Fucking put him up. Ugh. It's my chance. It's my chance to prove that I'm a real gamer. I'm gonna take down the Soda Man right now for everyone to see. Let's fucking go. Let's go. Yeah! Fucking look at that. Look at that!
There's also Gato, the rapping battle tutorial robot. He teaches you about counterattacks, and is probably the first fight you'll get into. His lyrics don't quite fit the background track in English, but that's because his name was supposed to be Gonzalez, but that was racist or something, so they changed it. I don't know. That's another thing. Chrono Trigger was a Ted Woosley translation. The best in the biz back then as far as I'm concerned, and the Super Nintendo edition of Chrono Trigger remains my favorite version because of his translation. He doesn't waste a word. This is a pro-Ted household, and we'll talk about the weird lines as they come, but all in all, commendable job. The most famous bit about the fair is, of course, how it plays into the trial later. Just outside of Gato's room, there's some old man's lunch you can eat to get your health back, which the game smartly does not restore after doing his tutorial fight. So if you wanted to really min-max this, the way you do it is to win his silver points, leave, eat the lunch to get your health back, come back, fight him, eat the lunch, come back, fight him. But doing this is punishing natural video gamey RPG behavior. If you try to grind this fight by getting your health back that easily, it counts against you in the trial. There's also this cat, which I'm sure most players do take the time to do. You can try to sell Marley's pendant to this well-dressed man, who really stands out amongst all the other generic townspeople. For good reason, of course. He's important, and his interest in Marley's pendant is about the millionth instance of foreshadowing we've seen so far. He has good reason to be interested in it, as we'll find out later. Chrono Trigger is a game which has thought of everything. There are so many kayfabe interactions which in any other game would not be acknowledged. You know what I'm talking about. Like how an NPC will say the exact same shit the whole game even though it doesn't make sense. Or how in the opening cutscene your town will get trashed and then remain destroyed for the entire game. Chrono Trigger is a game which thought about these things, and it updates the scenario to represent what's going on in the game. If you figure out that this girl is the princess, which there are plenty of clues if you chose to fuck around town earlier, and try to take her back to the castle, she gets flustered and leads you back outside. Interesting. If you come here by yourself, the guards throw you out. Of course, if the guards notice you before she leads you back outside, they would recognize the princess and her cover would be blown. So of course, she needs to be the one to throw you out of the castle, if you thought to bring her there.
Wow. It's stuff like this which makes Chrono Trigger so special. It's the attention to detail. It's trying to contend with the player's choices. It is one of the oldest examples of a game that tries to take into consideration what the player is going to do. There is a famous example of something like this in Phantasy Star 3, where if you break out of jail when you're not supposed to, the king tells you basically that you messed up the game and you have to restart. Well, Chrono Trigger is a game that doesn't take the lazy way out and make you restart. It's just a game that tries to acknowledge little player breaking moments like that and give you a little wink for doing something cool.
We'll get to them as they come, but there are so many playful lines of dialogue, or weird interactions, or situations you can get into if you try to finesse the game like this. What else is there? There's some butt-licking mini-games you can do to win a doll of yourself, or anyone else in your party for that matter, or more cats for your house, I don't know. These things suck and you're a psychopath if you actually enjoy playing them. Then we meet up with Luca, the Bulma of this story, who invents a way to teleport, cool. But when when combined with the magic from Marley's amulet, which has been established by that guy's interest in the thing and how much she cares about it, putting over the significance of this as a MacGuffin, this is a story object which is actually essential and integrated into the plot, which is extremely rare. Most of the time, MacGuffins are like keys to locked doors. I mean, we all love the eraser in Earthbound, right? That joke works because it points out how stupid most of them are. That's how silly whatever object you need is 99 out of 100 times. This is that 1 in 100 instance where the object is important enough and integral to what's actually going on. No pendant, no inciting incident here. And as the game goes on, we learn its backstory and why and where its magical powers came from. Ooh, love this effect, Back to the Past, but don't think about the rules too hard. It works sort of like Back to the Future, where Marley is going to be erased unless you fix the timeline, but this is really the only instance where something this urgent happens. The whole early Save the Princess adventure shows the characters in the game that their time-traveling shenanigans are actually capable of having real-world consequences, which is what convinces them to try and save the world when presented with the post-apocalypse. Saving Leanie and Marley here is the confidence builder. And the quest itself is well designed too. We're already familiar with this landscape because it's mostly the same as the present day. Only differences being you're trapped on the northern island and there's a church which didn't exist in the modern day. Of course, limiting the number of places you can go makes a player less likely to get lost when searching where to go next. The flavor of that bridge being out because Magus's army destroyed it is a welcome world-building element too. It also paves the way for that scene with Ozzy and the skeletons later. The bridge is out now, so it feels like an event when you're finally allowed to cross it later. The church being new, as in old, because, you know, the past, it being a different element from present day helps it stand out. Much like how you were funneled to the fair when the game starts, its inclusion funnels yourself there in this time. And yeah, after a horrifying bit where Marley disintegrates in front of our very eyes, you do anything funny in there? Yeah, funny how? Like haha funny? I don't know, I guess it was a little funny. This church becomes our first dungeon. And oh boy, it's a doozy. One of the greats, really. It's like the Great Deku Tree, and this is the best opening dungeons in video game history. If you talk to the NPCs, they all say some vaguely threatening things with dual meanings. Hopefully you're observant enough to notice the giant sparkly on the ground, which triggers a battle. Then we meet the fucking coolest video game character of all time. It's motherfucking Frog! Seriously, who doesn't love Frog immediately when you see him? He's just so cool. And his entrance saving Luca's ass puts him over huge. Then after playing the piano, our dungeon begins in proper, and much like what I said about the intro, if you are a pro gamer, you can just run right through this. In fact, aside from the boss from this point on, you only need to get into one fight. There's also a few branching paths, plenty of treasures to grab if you want them. We have the hidden Magus prayer room, which is off of a gag where the monsters think you're one of them in disguise. There's the bromide, which is something that would go over every single English speaker's head, but I think it's supposed to be smut of some kind, depicting those harpies we had to fight to get in here. These interactions are incredibly humanizing. To personify the enemies you're facing like this goes to show that you're not killing faceless, thoughtless, non-sentient mobs. These are people. They're portrayed as beings with lives, grumbling about their jobs. You're only killing them because war is hell, man. But again, this area is as much a mountain as you make it. Fighting the enemies is a good idea because not only do you get experience points and levels, but you also get this game's secondary upgrade system, the TP, which are how you unlock new moves. This dungeon is also when you're likely first going to be exposed to the dual text system, which is a way of spending two party members' turns to do one super move, such as Chrono and Luca's Fire Whirl, and the MVP right now, Frog and Chrono's X Strike. In here we have basic enemy varieties such as the henches, which resist physical attacks, incentivizing you to dig into that tech menu to find other ways of killing them. Of course, this is a trick as old as time, a thing that resists physical, a thing that resists magic, and it's your job to figure out and recognize what's what to act accordingly. It helps the fights not be a thing where you mash A until they're over. Now, does Chrono Trigger succeed in having this not be a mash A fest? Sometimes it's definitely true for the boss fights, but for most normal enemies, you can get away with just mashing A. The guy at the fair where you mash A to drink soda, he was actually training you for the random encounters. You're supposed to mash until you can't feel your hand anymore. Which yeah, mashing won't work against this guy though. Yakra's solid for a first boss fight. It's basically the exact same kind of battle as Gato back at the fair. His thing is that he'll counterattack given the right circumstances, so you need to mind your position and not trigger his counterattacks, keep your health high, and it goes down in no time. Back at the castle, your awesome new frog friend says you have potential to be a great swordsman. Classic technique. They give you a little taste of someone stronger, even if Frog was only slightly more powerful here. The effect still works. You want to be as cool and kick as much ass as this frog, and here he is telling you that someday you might. The Chancellor then remarks that they need to establish a criminal justice system to deal with guys that you just killed? I mean, I don't know, it seems like I dealt with them pretty well. Of course, this line comes around minutes later. All's well that ends well, we get Marley back, everything's wrapped up in a neat little package, and in a lesser title, that small adventure we just went through would be the entire game stretched out. But here, that's just a small piece. Then the coolest scene in video game history happens. Fuck, no! Go away! Okay. Before we get there, this right here is the worst encounter in the entire game. Every time you go through this canyon, there is no way to avoid this fight. Every single gosh darn time. And you come here a lot. You cross through this canyon repeatedly. Gosh damn it, frick. Anyway, yeah, the coolest scene in video game history. I mean, look at this background. Is this the greatest screen, the greatest singular background on the Super Nintendo? I got nothing to add about the trial. You've heard it all before. It's a crazy rug pull that the game was monitoring your behavior the whole time. A holy shit, mind-blowing, crazy awesome moment that every single person who plays this game remembers. And I believe that most people playing this for the first time, especially if you were a kid, you're found guilty here. You ate the lunch, you may or may not have returned the cat, you tried to sell the pendant, you ran away while Marley was looking at candy. You did all the things, you were found guilty. Of course, it doesn't matter because the Chancellor, who we later find out is actually the ancestor to the boss you just killed, is corrupt and you're sentenced to death anyway. And that was probably the best way to handle this. The prison break sequence is integral to the game because all of the events lead into each other. You only go to the future because you're running away from the guards, and you only choose to try and save the world because you went to the future. None of these events happen if you're allowed to just walk free. So while it is weird that your reward for being found innocent is some friggin' ethers you'll probably never use anyway, I understand why it had to be this way. Plus, you would miss out on this awesome dungeon escaping prison if you were allowed to skip it for being found innocent. This place kicks ass. Waiting for Luca to save you probably makes more sense as a story, but who the hell wants to do that? What I appreciate about this place is it does a great job of making a small space feel large. It's a quasi-maze, but the entire area is basically just two four-way intersections which look identical. Again, much like everything else, it's geared towards repeat playthroughs, because if you know what you're doing, you can just run through here. But for a first-time player, there's tons of stuff to mess around with. We can free Fritz from the guillotine, which remember was hinted at if you took the time to explore at the start. We can climb the outside walls for a sword upgrade and some miscellaneous items. There's a cute interaction with this swankier looking guard where he doesn't fight to the death, instead you do enough damage and then he says, "They don't pay me enough for this." Womp womp, before he scurries off. You and me both, brother. These enemies right here are a little annoying because it's just waiting for them to open up. Luckily, if you're pixel perfect, you can just walk between them, skipping the fights. You can also skip more fights by knocking out the guards from behind, which is actually taught to you while you're breaking out of your prison cell. This isn't a cutscene that automatically plays, you actually have to hit A and swing your sword after he turns his back. Easy to miss because I'm kind of just mashing here normally. A lot of of the appeal of this game comes from the small excesses. This is all stuff you could easily miss, and they didn't have to include any of these interactions, but Chrono Trigger is a game that rewards you if you're thorough, and not just through tangible rewards like a sword, through experiences. Do you get anything from knocking out the guards from behind? No, not really. I mean, there's a random chance they can drop a potion, which I guess is nice, but the real reward is the satisfaction of doing that action. It just feels cool breaking your way out of a prison like that.
Actually, technically, if you're a filthy min-max gamer and you want to do everything the complete optimal way, it probably makes more sense to let Luca save you from prison because you get to skip half the dungeon and you have 2 party members. But that's not the point, man. You gotta feel cool. You want to feel like you're actually breaking out of jail. Like, that would suck. Hold on, let me just thread the needle here. Yeah, hell yeah, fuck those guys.
But even trying not to come, she still comes anyway. Which leads to our first of many encounters with the 3-pronged boss archetype. Here's the deal with pretty much all of them. One bit heals, another has a super powerful fuck you attack that you will lose if you let him get off enough times, and the third is what you actually have to kill to end the fight. Fairly simple, and there's even a note on the ground explaining exactly what you have to do here. But if you can't read or you just don't pick up on this, then you'll probably die to this thing. I once watched someone play through this game for the first time and die at least one time on every single boss. Yes, including Yakra. And no, I'm not even exaggerating. They died on every single boss fight. If you're watching, you know who you are. A lot of people like to call Chrono Trigger easy, which it is sort of. It's more forgiving than it is easy though. And there is a difference. If you're not careful, you can die to some of these bosses, but there is always a save point directly before. The encounters themselves can be slightly challenging, they just let you try it again with no real penalty. Again, for me that means it's forgiving, not easy. Most importantly though, you never ever need to grind a single battle in this entire game. It is balanced around you still being able to do these fights if you employ the correct tactics, even if you were skipping hella fights getting to this. Chrono then stabs the dragon tank with a thrusting animation we haven't seen yet, for no other reason than it looks fucking awesome. Again, thing they didn't have to do, could have just blown up, and they defo didn't have to have this happen. I was always amused by this line. Don't fool yourselves into think you've gotten away with this. Like, sorry dude, who's standing on who now? And here's another Chrono Trigger flourish that no other game of this era would ever allow you to do. After being chased, you can actually go back through this time gate leading to the present. I know, mind blow. But if you try to walk past the castle, the guards see you and chase you back into the future.
Now, does this matter, like on a microscopic, if you dig down this one specific example, does it matter? Does this really make the game so much better? No, but it's a death by a million cuts. I've played 56 of these here Super Nintendo RPGs so far, and this never happens. Like, you're lucky if you're playing through a game, you get one wink or just one acknowledgement of something like this. Most games, any other game, I would say, like every single other game on the Super Nintendo would either disable the time gate or they just have it disappear or it just wouldn't work. Nobody else, no other game would let you go back through it and actually like entertain your choice. That's like thinking outside the box. Now I know in present day, things like Undertale exist, so it's not quite as impressive these days, but that came out 20 years later. As I said, I played through so many Super Nintendo games and like none of them do anything like this. The fact that Chrono Trigger has moments like this sprinkled everywhere, all the time there are things going on like this, where it's just a little subtle wink towards the player that they made a weird choice. It never happens in any other game.
You might notice this door with the same crest as those chests you've been seeing all game. Same deal, same jingle, even more mysterious because this magical seal seems to transcend the few hundred-year window you've been exposed to so far. Stepping outside, we're exposed to this brutally barren, brown, desolate wasteland, devoid of all life. So, Detroit. And you, the player, figure out what this is well before the characters do. We have biodomes, trashed stoplights. This is a post-apocalypse future hellscape. That is 1000% crystal clear with no ambiguity. This is your future. Like the royal you, the planet's future. Our party members are all from over 1,000 years ago, so they'll be dead. As a whole, the future is interesting because it's the first time that our objective has been unclear. As it turns out, it's to get from point A to point B, but I mean like our characters don't have any sense of what they're supposed to be doing. Up until this point, everything has had purpose and momentum, but now we're just asylum seekers here. There's no grand ambition to our presence. The first person we're able to interact with is a shopkeep who questions if what we try to offer him is really money, which raises a good point. Reminds me of the original Shin Megami Tensei. There's not time travel in that, but there is a bit where you wake up from a long sleep, Futurama style. Then you come across a homeless bum who asks you for money, so you try to give him some, and he's like, what the fuck is this yen shit? We use maca now. Then the game makes you sit there while your money counter slowly winds all the way down to 0. It's a really effective moment, but it's also a kick square to the nuts. Chrono Trigger goes for convenience above all else. The game realizes it's silly for these future men to accept the same kind of currency, but it also doesn't want to have the player juggle around different kinds of money for each time period. This line is acknowledging that. Anyway, yeah, this place is fucking depressing. Nobody even moves. They might as well be chiseled into the background. My favorite is the guy who just says, "If you're looking for food, you lose!" The idea of the Enertron, which allows you to live without food, restoring your HP and MP, chased with a message, "But you're still hungry?" Oh wow. Mwah. That's just a chef's kiss right there. Gets over the emotions just in that one line. For these people, existence is suffering. The future as a whole is structured kind of like a giant dungeon, and that you begin over, you have to end up over, and we have all this stuff in the middle that's in the way. No other time period in the game is like that, so we have to pass through these piles of garbage to get where we're going. It almost feels like a haphazard, unintentional path, but it's always clear where you can go. This is something that a game like Final Fantasy VII struggles with when going through similar slummy dump areas. Sometimes it can be confusing when you're going for the intentionally ghetto and trashed look, where the way forward is just obscured by garbage, but they pull it off here. Ironically, it means that there's less branching paths. Up until this point, the areas you've traversed have been trying to emulate real places. For example, the church was laid out how an actual church building might have been. It wasn't a point A to point B ass JRPG ass dungeon ass. It wasn't just like a video gamey place that you'd try to get from one spot to another. They were buildings with rooms laid out in a coherent way. This garbage pile is just chaos, fittingly so. Then we have a town, sort of, a dome. The peoples here are a little more jovial than the ones we saw before. They're actually capable of moving, for one. But I'm more interested in this place from a level design perspective, because we had to go through a transitionary area to get here. Then it seems like we need to go through a proper dungeon to get to the food storage everyone's talking about, but you really don't. You walk unimpeded straight into a boss. They let you go through the entire screen before without seeing any enemies, and then just boom, get shitted on. This guy's another three-pronged enemy, but it's also one that counterattacks, combining both of the boss gimmicks you've been exposed to so far. Then the actual dungeon part comes after this boss. We get the seed, chase the rat, give the seed back to the people, but then we actually do have a bit of a proper area to get to the real payoff of this, and the whole point of the place. It's a little weird leading with the boss fight and then having you do the area. Of course, it's all building up to the linchpin of this entire game. Here's where we learn, along with all of the characters in the game at the same time, that in 1999, this spiky fuckball rises up from the depths of hell, jizzes everywhere, not even attempting to try not to come, just blasting everywhere, which unfortunately fucks the world. Everything is instantly destroyed, and the result is everything we just trudged through to get here. They smartly force you to go through half of the future areas before hitting you with this, so you see the devastation firsthand. From this point forward, everything you do has an eye towards preventing this from happening. The scene gives us an overall objective for the game, gives us something to strive for, and every single objective going forward has something to do with Lavos. Chrono Trigger is an incredibly focused game. There is no parts where you go off and pick daisies for no reason. You don't help out a village of reptiles to try to save an orphanage or whatever the fuck you do here. There's nothing like appeasing the 6 dragon gods because the game says you have to do that before you can get into the next area.
Oh yeah, I went there. Chrono Cross I'll try to hold back, but your time might be coming soon.
Chrono Trigger is a lean, mean, killing machine. There is no filler. Everything exists for a reason. Everything fits into a place. Nothing is ever wasted in this game.
And with that being said, here are 2 absolutely pointless things Chrono Trigger has you do.
From here, you can go into the sewers, which is the largest boondoggle in the entire game. You get nothing! At least from a gameplay perspective. I guess experience and levels, but those are whores. You can get that anywhere. You do obtain a sword, so that's nice, right? But it's the exact same one you'll get anyway in about 10 minutes if you chose not to come inside of this. No, you gain life experiences for coming down here. Like those frogs doing that slapstick routine was cute, right? No? Well, here's the sewer's saving grace. The bit where you have to be quiet to not start any battles. You're walking down this narrow passageway, and the gimmick is to not touch any of these objects because they'll make noise, triggering a fight. At the end of this, devilishly, the game decides to put a save point, which when you walk over makes a little ding, which is enough to trigger one of these battles. That's fucking hilarious. There's also this part, a seemingly dead end where you actually have to walk behind this wall to progress. One of 2 moments in the game I would personally consider too cryptic. For the most part, Chrono Trigger does a great job leading the player, but for this one hallway, they hid the goat a little too well. The boss fight in here is a gimmick where he'll reduce your HP to 1 without killing you. I don't know, he's so unimportant, the game didn't even bother giving him the boss music, so fuck him. Remember earlier when I said that foreshadowing was like this game's favorite thing? Well, here is the most brazen example. You have to do this sewer area eventually, but not until way later. Your reward for doing it this early is purely speaking to this man and his sentient blue ball. He didn't even say that much, and the first time playing the game, you have no idea who the frick this guy is. And none of the few things he does say make any sense to you anyway. This place is purely here for you to stumble into and then remember later after you learn this guy's backstory.
And I respect this, designer man, allowing the player to do a completely, absolutely unnecessary area early just to flesh out one plot point that the player doesn't even know about yet. That's pretty darn cool. I like it a lot more than our other branching path here anyway.
This is Johnny. Cool character design, shitty, pointless racing minigame. It's not fun. 99% of the race doesn't matter because the whole thing is rubber banded. You just have to boost at the end. It always bothered me how you're driving the wrong way, like we're supposed to be going west to east or rightwards on the world map, yet we're driving to the left. I beat this game probably 286 times before I realized you don't actually have to do this race, and if you just walk to the right, you can go down the path as if it's a regular area. Johnny is never once acknowledged anywhere else in the game. You could cut all of this out and nothing would be different.
In such a tight, compact game such as Chrono Trigger, when something isn't necessary, it really stands out. It throws the whole thing off of whack, only because everything else fits, everything else has a purpose. And then you just do some stuff that, like, doesn't matter. And that's really just a testament to how great Chrono Trigger is. I like to say that the more specific your complaints about a given game are, the better it probably is, because you can't just dismiss it summarily on premise alone or based on the controls or something more superficial. You need to actually dig your teeth in to see these minor problems, then the game's actually probably pretty good. And with Chrono Trigger, the best I can come up with so far is I wish that one encounter in Truce Canyon didn't exist. The dead end in the sewer is stupid, and I don't think the racing is very fun. Technically optional racing, by the way, so they're doing a tremendous job.
Speaking of incredible jobs, Luca then fixes a robot named Robo, despite being from over 1,000 years in the past and should have no idea how any of this future technology works. But well, I mean, I guess she did build Gato, so fair enough. Then there's another dungeon, and the first time we have to deal with party composition. Up until this point, the game has chosen who will get to be with you and when, but now we get to choose. Who's the best girl, Marley or Luca? It's a choice between offense or defense, supermodel or girl next door, hot date at the fair or burn down an orphanage. I picked Luca this time, but admittedly I did used to choose Marley more back when I would play this game repeatedly. The factory is interesting because the first room is a branching path that never converges. One way is progress, but you need a password to finish it. The other way only exists to get said password, but Chrono Trigger is cool enough that it doesn't force you to get this password if you already know it. So I think I might have only done the other section exactly one time in my entire life, which, considering how I've seen the rest of the game hundreds, maybe even thousands of times, is a testament to how shitty that other bit is. Replaying through it purely for science in this video, yeah, it's just a bunch of unavoidable fights, which is not fun. I'd wager that almost nobody does this part, even on a first playthrough. Just look up the password, or hell, I'll tell you, it's XABY. Hit those face buttons on the controller.
So, Robo, despite being, a robot, has emotions and feelings. They treat him like he's a real character, like he's a human being with wants, needs, feels, the whole nine. So, you need to understand the difference. When you see the future for the first time, your reaction is, oh, what's this shithole? But Robo, this was his shithole. This is his world that got obliterated, so it's extra heartbreaking for him.
Because of this, Robo is kind of depressed. So much so that when we meet a bunch of other Robos who just beat the shit out of him, all Robo can do is sit there and take it. And all we can do is watch, because in Robo's words, these are my brothers. I cry every time. The fight itself is a 6-on-2 beatdown, where it's about killing some of them fast enough before you get overwhelmed. If you let all 6 stay alive, then you probably die, but if you pinpoint on a few of them or a single row, then you stand a chance. Cyclone, Slash, Flame Toss, anything which attacks more than one guy at a time is a cheat code here. Then something strange happens. For contrived bullshit reasons, going through the next gate brings us to the end of time. The game only allows you to have 3 party members, so they have this old man in a trench coat tell you that only 3 people can travel through time at once, or else you end up here, a space between times. Doesn't make sense even with the logic they set up, because from here on out, whenever you go through any time gate, you end up here regardless of how many people are with you. In fact, the only other instance where you travel through time with more than 3 people after battling Magus is the other time you do not end up here. So, what the fuck, game? I don't know, doesn't matter. That's just a nitpick. That's a cinema sin. Ding! The end of time is our hub area and home base from here on out. It is a centralized location where you can heal and transport yourself to any other time period in the game. And with how complex things are about to get, this is a sorely welcome design choice. Chrono Trigger is again striving for convenience, and they gave us one here. Then we meet Specchio the monkey, who changes his appearance depending on what level you're at. He teaches our party magic, which we already kind of knew. Luca could already shoot fire with the power of science! And Marley's aura ability is magic of some kind, no? And not Robo. He can't learn magic because he's not human. I love the kayfabe in this game about who can and cannot learn magic. Specchio states that long ago, humans could use magic, but nowadays only wizards can. Which is weird because this is a place outside of time itself, so referencing past, present, or future doesn't really make sense. And the wizards thing is weird because that's a Woollyism, something that Ted Woosley invented. What he's trying to refer to are the monsters we fought at the church in 600. Those beings can still use magic. And we're about to become much more acquainted with those wizards, because the next area is in the year 1000's Monster Village. These are the descendants of the ones who lost the magic war in 600, and they fucking hate all humans as a result. I mean, this guy thinks we just came out of the closet. I mean, dude, there's 2 women at my side, but sure. The weapons shop makes you fight a dude before they sell you anything, and the prices are gouged to hell, so you can't buy any of it anyway. If you go to the center of town, they're worshipping a statue of Magus despite him being dead for 400 years. I love this. For people on their first run, it's possibly the first time you've seen the weird godification of this Magus guy, but their chants are also informational. It's where we learn, in quotes, that Lavos was created by Magus to wipe out the human race. Which is some I may have lost the battle, but I'm sure as hell I'm gonna win the war poison pill type shit. That gives us our next objective. If Lavos was created by Magus, then destroying Magus means that Lavos will never exist. Simple, right? We just have to go to 600, kick his ass, bada bing, bada boom, that'll save the world. And the gate to 600 is back at the fair, meaning we have to return to the start of the game. But first, oh snap! It's that building we saw on the ferry ride at the start. Now we get to finally see what's in there. Oh my, it's that well-dressed man you may or may not have tried to sell Marley's pendant to at the fair. He informs you that you can get back to your village, remember our next objective because that leads to 600, through this sketchy cave. Which is a pretty simple and straightforward area, not much going on here. Only the boss is the creature on the front of the fucking game. Cool to see him, but he's really not important. He perpetrates the myth that Magus created Lavos. He can only be hurt by magical attacks, and his gimmick is that he counterattacks you if you try to hit him when he's in this pose. Cool design. He's like the Boba Fett of Chrono Trigger. Doesn't really do anything, but he looks cool, and I wish he had a larger role. Back in your hometown, there's some updated dialogue. You can go see your mom, who totally flips out seeing you. You can go see Fritz, aka the guy you freed from the guillotine, and some other random NPCs say new things. Again, cool attention to detail, above and beyond what pretty much every other game on the Super Nintendo did, and yada yada yada. I've already said that a million times. But here's a new point I want to make. When we go back to 600, I'd like to show you what I believe is the #1 secret sauce to Chrono Trigger's success. It's a piece of basic screenwriting 101 advice, which is to always only show the reader or viewer, or in this case player, the most interesting parts of your story. If a story only has 10 events, but the runtime of your project only allows you to show 6 of them, you're gonna show the 6 most interesting things. I would hope. The way Chrono Trigger's time travel works is kind of unique. If you go to the past for 20 minutes, then come back through the same time portal, 20 minutes will have still gone by in the time period you were not in. It doesn't freeze. That's why you were accused of kidnapping the princess, because in that reality you were still gone for however long that adventure lasted, even though it took place 400 years ago. Chrono Trigger uses this fact to its advantage when it comes to storytelling, and here's a basic example. The last time we were in 600, the bridge was out, destroyed, it was a stump. The game even allowed you to go here so you could confirm that the bridge was in fact not there. While we were gone, the bridge was fixed. You see, rescuing a princess is exciting. That's an exciting quest. That's an exciting action. Building a bridge is not. In a lesser game, let's take Lufia for example. In that title, there's a bit where you rescue a fairy from atop of this tower, bringing peace and prosperity to all the peoples of the land. An exciting act, right? The next thing you do is escort a bridge builder through a large section of the world, through a cave, leave him there, backtrack, gather materials for the bridge, go back through the cave again, bring the wood to the bridge builder, but he won't start working unless there's someone on this cliff doing lookout for him. I don't know why, he just won't. So you have to leave the cave again, go back through another entrance so you can watch him build the bridge from that fucking cliff, then backtrack out of the cave again. Go back through the other entrance so you can finally actually fucking use the bridge that he built.
Oh, I'm sorry, I fell asleep. My point is, bridge building is fucking boring.
What's amazing about Chrono Trigger is that using time travel, it cuts out all of the boring bits that don't matter to the overall story. There's no fucking quest where you rebuild the bridge. There's no bit where you have to help out that weird guy and his giant blue ball finish building the thingamajig he was working on. There's no part where you have to manually plant all the trees later when you reforest that part of the continent. Chrono Trigger is a game where each era tells its own independent story. We have caveman times, the Ice Age, 600, 1000, and 2300. Each have their own tale about how Lavos affects them. It's 5 stories stitched together, a series of vignettes. Time travel is just the glue which holds it together, and it's only interested in showing the player the absolute most interesting parts of each of these 5 stories.
Now, does all of this sound way too obvious? Like, no shit. What are we gonna do? Not show the most interesting parts of our story to the player?
Oh boy, how the hell did Chrono Cross manage to fuck this up so bad? Trigger managed to get this right 5 separate times, yet Chrono Cross, a game with 1 story, not 5, manages to not show the player any of its key events. It is truly remarkable how much of this game is told through text boxes, explaining things which happen outside the scope of the game. It's bizarre. We never see Poor take over Guardia, we never see the Frozen Flame heal you as a child, we don't see Shala merge with Lavos, we don't see Balthazar craft the islands you live on, we don't see the war between Dinopolis and Chronopolis, we don't see Luca die, we don't see Marley die, we don't see Chrono die. You don't get to see shit in this game. You see some surfer fuckboy switch bodies with a cat who is your dad reincarnated, I guess, and then a clown hits on you who's actually a fucking dinosaur. Another thing we never see, only fucking hear about because the reveal happens off screen, by the way. Oh man. Alright, enough of that. Back to Trigger. In 600, after fetching some food for the troops in the front line, undermining my point about only doing interesting things in this game, they try to spice it up with a personal dynamic, but it's a little weird. On the bridge, we meet Ozzy, the comedic relief villain. He's not that funny, but at least he's trying, man. Exactly how I would describe this video. Then the party fights a big skeleton monster, probably one of the tougher battles in the whole game. Its top and bottom are both weak to different elements, so it's about recognizing this and hitting certain parts with their corresponding spells. Finally, we're across the bridge they teased us with at the start of the game, and it's about goddamn time. So, this is a pretty contentious part of Chrono Trigger. A lot of times when people are playing through this game and they don't know if they're going to finish it, they don't know if they really like it yet, they'll get to around here before they realize it doesn't vibe with them and they drop off. And even though I really love this section, I totally understand why. This is the most adventure gamey that Chrono Trigger ever gets. So far, every objective has been spelled out pretty obviously, and in situations where it wasn't, i.e. the future, there's not a lot of places to get lost. The areas in that time are incredibly straightforward. You can even include Before the Bridge as a part of this with the beef jerky quest. But it's the first time in the game where you actually have to do the old tried and true, talk to everyone, gather information, so you can figure out on your own what to do next. You're solving a mystery. It's a where the fuck do I go kind of game part. The first time you go to the past is an eensy-weensy bit of that, but you're trapped in a relatively small area, so it's not a big deal. This section of the game is almost King's Questy, which is maybe a little weird because the overall story arc is Chrono Trigger at its most Dragon Quest. Middle Ages, knights, castles, legendary hero, magical sword, which is the only thing that can defeat the evil fiend lord, all that shit. We're officially in the MAGUS arc, which is composed of 3 smaller quests. You can think of it sort of like how Dragon Ball has sagas, like how the Cell Saga is made up of a bunch of smaller ones. The Android, the Trunks, Imperfect Cell, Perfect Cell, etc. You know what I'm saying. Though I guess if you don't know anything about Dragon Ball, you wouldn't. What I'm getting at, this is where the game really starts to build MAGUS up as the primary threat. So far, he's just been kind of a name we've heard. I like this lady. The hero has appeared? That means the epic battle will begin. Like, what a thing to say. Lots of NPCs here exist to hype up MAGUS. Did you flee from Magus's troops? MAGUS has 3 fearsome henchmen, Ozzy, Flea, and Slash. They're tone deaf. Evil fiends, a joke because they're all named after musicians. Clear your conscience, the end of the world is coming. MAGUS is trying to bring forth an immense evil. If he succeeds, there will be nowhere to run. We'll all perish. Yeah, you get the idea. MAGUS this, MAGUS that. They're also building up this new hero. We first hear about him from the castle and from the bridge soldiers. But these NPCs are constantly talking about him here. Hero this, hero that. I'm the hero's father. I can't believe that brat was the hero. Hidden in this area is the payoff to spotting that bromide earlier. This dirty pervert wants to jack off to monster porn. Of this thing. This thing. Ugh. I mean, whatever floats your boat or rises your rocket, man, I guess. They also set up a couple late game side quests with the 3 different spots you can speak to Toma here, and with Fiona's hut, which we heard about in 1000. The rest are informational. They hint at what you're actually supposed to be doing. We learn about 3 places of interest through investigating. The woods have been taken over by menacing frogs. Interesting. Like our friend Frog? This old man is almost certainly describing him. And you want to see Frog again, right? He was fucking awesome! Of course we want to see him again. We learn that Magus's troops have been seen coming out of this cliffside east of the mountains. And we learn that the hero of legends is searching for the legendary sword in these mountains up north. In order of excitement, investigating frog sightings leads to my number 2 thing, which is perhaps a little more cryptic than it should be. You reach the end of this path and it just looks like a dead end. You're supposed to go behind and inside of this bush, which is something I know I didn't figure out on my own as a kid. I can never see this game for the first time again, so I don't know exactly how puzzling this is to someone new, but I can totally see someone coming all the way over here, seeing that this is a dead end, then turning around because you think you missed a quest to trigger somewhere. Heck, in another location we have to investigate, there's not shit going on there yet, so I can see why someone might think that these woods are the same. It's a little too cryptic. I get why they did this, it's because it adds to Frog's characterization. He feels he's a disgraced knight, as we saw earlier when he was giving himself a hard time for not protecting the queen. Speaking to him now, in his own words, a hero he is not. He's basically hiding from the world. He's embarrassed. He doesn't want you to find him. Hence why he's fucking hidden. I get it. But this also probably should have just been a ladder leading to his hidey hole. I feel like that gets the same thing across. I mean, it's still in the middle of the woods where nobody would go. I don't know. Frog is too depressed to help us right now anyway, so this is not the way forward yet.
Again, I really like this section. This is the part of Chrono Trigger where it's not as obvious what you're supposed to be doing, so of course more people drop off, people get lost, they don't know what to do, and they drop the game. I have heard this through like first impressions videos and through, over the years, the many people I have forced to, against their will, play through Chrono Trigger just so I could vicariously experience it again through them, because you can never see it again for the first time. Like this frog part, I don't know, I'll never know what it's like to have to figure this out again for the first time. I know I couldn't when I was a kid, but who knows, maybe as an adult with fresh eyes, this would be painfully obvious to me. I can see why people drop the game at this section, but I'll defend it to the death because it's one of my favorite parts. Frickin' every part of this game is one of my favorite parts, but I think it's really well done. And there is a place in a game like this for a little bit of adventure gameness.
Our third lead, however, is a bullseye. The Denendoro Mountains begin with some geeker
You're geeking!
running away from the easiest enemy of all time. They're making fun of Dragon Quest. On the nose here. This kid looks exactly like a Dragon Quest protagonist, and he's a scared little brat when trying to actually do something heroic. As for these mountains, they are long, hard, and straight. Sometimes curved. There's waterfalls flowing off of them. It's not a large area, but it feels huge. Much like the prison earlier, but not with nearly as many branching paths. They achieve this fake hugeness by having the area scale vertically, giving you some nice mountaintop views, and by torturing you with far and away the most amount of forced battles we have come across so far. I counted 9, but that's including a 4-parter where you have to do 4 fights back to back to back to back as one. So it's either 9 or 13, depending on how you see it. You're gonna be doing some fighting here. And it's compounded by the fact that in order to kill the most common enemy here, Ogans, you have to hit them with Luca's fire to burn their hammers and lower their defenses. That's a cool interaction, but it also slows these fights down to a crawl. You can't just idly mow these creatures down. You actually have to go into the menu, pick fire, attack the correct foe, adds a few extra steps. If you're crazy enough to jump down a waterfall, you'll get 2 of the most busted items in the game for this stage, the silver earring and stud, which increase your HP and cut MP costs respectively. This place feels like a real climb, and for the first time in this game, I'd say the dungeon comes across as a true test of strength. All of these forced encounters is also another way the game manages to keep up its perfect balancing. I have never once played another game this well balanced in my life. There is nothing approaching a difficulty spike. Again, you never, ever, ever, never, ever, never, ever, ever, never, ever, never, 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 ever, never, ever, never, never, ever, ever have to do a single extra battle. Never, ever. You can just do the forced battles and be fine. It is witch doctor magic, and having these strategic fights you cannot ignore. Sure, it's a little annoying in the moment, but remember, any other RPG of this era, all of the fights are unavoidable, so some of them being forced on you here only feels like a disappointment because we've gotten hooked on the good stuff. Let me avoid the fights again, damn it. A warning the game will not heed, because from here on out, there's as many forced encounters as avoidable ones. Because our party needs experience, and this game is making sure we're getting some. At the top lies probably the most serious boss we've encountered so far, Masa and Moon. It's a 2-parter. Form 1, they counterattack you with X-Strike, but they're also bitches, so it's not a big deal. Form 2, you know the game's not fucking around anymore because it gets a brand new boss theme. His deal is he charges up his fuck you attack, and if you're at or below half health when it hits, he will kill you. The real check in this fight is for you to notice when his sprite changes to his constipated O face. then to heal up before he can deliver the blow. After that is a cool story moment. We get the legendary sword, but in a twist, the thing is a chintzy piece of shit and snapped in half, meaning you still have to find the hilt of the Masa Moon.
And yes, that is seriously how I'm going to choose to pronounce it. Read my lips. Masa Moon. That's how I'm gonna say it, and I don't care what you have to say. I'm sorry, that's just how I've said it my entire life, and I'm not gonna change now.
After all of this hype about a legendary sword, which is actually broken, all this hype about a legendary hero who is actually just a small child, both legends are built up well and then cut down expertly. A misdirection, but deep down we should know. In the very cockles of our being, Frog has to be the hero. So we show him the sword, give him the badge, but even after giving him the medal back, he is still depressed and the sword is still broken. But Frog has the hilt and it reads Melchior, aka the well-dressed man who lives 400 years in the future. Now this is a juicy burger. I'd like to point out something excessively cool about Chrono Trigger. Cutscenes have different dialogue depending on who is in your party. If you examine the sword with Marley and Luca, Luca is the one who reads Melchior off the hilt. Robo and Marley has Robo read. But what if you have Robo and Luca? I was genuinely curious and didn't know. Turns out, Robo takes priority here. He's the one who reads. There are plentiful scenes where multiple characters are forced to play the same role depending on who you have with you. And I've always found it interesting who the game chooses to do what if you have two separate people capable of performing the same part in dialogue. In fact, I'm excited to see who helps Melchior fix the sword if you have both Luca and Robo with you, because I know for a fact they both can. Whenever I played through this game, Marley was always a mainstay for me, so I legitimately don't know who it is as I'm writing this because I don't know if I've ever done it. But before we can find out, there's another quest we have to do. Melchior is able to fix the sword, but he needs an ancient red rock which hasn't existed for a long time. Hopefully the player would realize here at this point through their intuition and gamer sense that they have to go through the other gate that we skipped over at the end of time. It's worth mentioning that you are allowed to come here early as soon as you get to the end of time, in fact. And I'm sure first-time players curiously did, but much like doing the sewer early, you really don't get anything out of it. The game doesn't even allow you to use the trading hut yet under the kayfabe reason that their chief hasn't said that you're okay to barter with. You can also learn early that this guy named Kino doesn't like us, setting up when he steals our stuff in a few minutes. If you feel like wasting even more time, you can climb the dactyl's nest to see a glowing red thing in the sky. A very nice bit of foreshadowing, but completely unnecessary, and a colossal waste of time to come here early. Even more so than the sewers, because you don't even unlock a shortcut this time. Coming here after you learn you need the Dreamstone, however, results in... Oh death by Snoo Snoo.
Yeah!
I don't know how they did it, but they did. They managed to make a tiny, undetailed Super Nintendo character legitimately hot. Like, grab a glass of orange juice because here we go! Instantly crushing, demolishing any and all best girl debates. Isla fucking owns. She dwarfs Chrono in attack power too. Just when you think the new characters can't get any cooler. We had Marley, who is kind of cool, the wild princess wants to get away. Luca, nerdy, but also still cool in a different kind of way. Frog, I don't even have to comment on, the epitome of cool. Then a robot, again, cool. Now we have this cave woman who could rip you limb from limb if she wanted, and whose reaction to meeting you is to throw a giant party. Holy shit, this game just keeps topping itself. And the last character after this, because there's only one more party member, I know, sad, somehow is even cooler than this. Debatably, this might be max coolness. I almost always stick with the chicks, so for the party scene, I've accepted that dancing with Marley while Luca gets drunk is just the canon series of events. So for shits and giggles, I brought Robo this time, and oh boy, that was a mistake because he's a fucking downer. All he does is sit in the corner complaining about his food the whole time. Jeez.
All right, Isla, you and me, you're going down. Little does she know I prepared with the soda man and she did not. So let's fucking do this. Yeah. I'm not ripping this shirt. In fact, you want to know something? Winning this is not nearly as impressive as winning the soda thing at the fair. And I'm gonna come clean. I used the turbo controller. I didn't actually beat the soda man. I did it in the past. I could do it when I was younger. I tried doing it on command and I failed. But thanks to turbo controller, no problem.
The forest maze after this isn't a maze at all, but the area it leads into is kind of, though. Here is Chrono Trigger's take on the Falling Pit dungeon. There's no real wrong way to go because everything leads to the end, but if you want to get every treasure chest, it requires you to leave and come back through 3 separate times. There's a few decent things in here, like the ruby vest is pretty good for this stage in the game, and there's an elixir in here somewhere. Not worth it though, just come through here once. The boss and this regular enemy right here work the same way those Ogans did back in the Denendoro Mountains, as in you have to hit them with one specific element to lower their defenses, in this case Chrono's lightning, in order to actually deal damage. For Nizbel, the boss, it's kind of a double-edged risk-reward thing, because the very same electricity you have been hitting him with is what powers up his fuck you attack. This whole dynamic between the cavemen and the reptiles is an interesting direction to go, where the reptiles are more technologically advanced than the humans, as we will later see more clear-cut with their elaborate lair, but Azala's fancy getup, chastising you for making something this advanced. I mean, never mind the robot I freaking rolled up with. 65 million BC has the most simple plotline, I guess fittingly. It's just humans versus reptiles. They be fighting the reptiles. Not much more happens than that. Isla puking after you get the key back was a great touch. Can of Coke to whoever thought of that. After getting the rock, it's time to find out who helps Melchior if you go to him with both Robo and Luca. And it's Luca. Very nice. That's what made more sense in my headcanon too. This sequence is all set to the Zeal theme, which technically we heard a snippet of earlier when Melchior brought up the Masamune for the first time, but this is our first extended exposure to it. Now, I'm not a music guy. I don't know anything about the what's, where's, when's, how's, and why's, but this has to be maybe the greatest pairing of a music track to what it represents in the game. Perfect placement. It represents what Zeal as a place is, which of course the player doesn't know anything about yet, but you get sort of an extended look here just by being able to listen to the song.
I have always been of the opinion that something like the original Super Mario Brothers theme really could have been anything. You know, the iconic doot 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 doot. Like if you went back in time and you swapped that song out with another similar upbeat melodic thing, then that other song will be just as iconic as the Super Mario Brothers theme was in like our timeline. And I think that's true with most video game music. 99 out of 100 video game tracks, I think it's the game that makes the songs iconic and not the other way around. This, however, the Zeal theme in Chrono Trigger is that 1 in 100 exception where the song really does elevate the moment. When you first step into Zeal and this is playing, it's what makes that one of the most memorable things in the game. But of course, we're not quite there yet, so we'll get to it when we are.
What is Luca doing, by the way? Casting a spell on the Dreamstone? And if so, how would Melchior expect her to do that? Now that the sword is fixed, Frog agrees to help us out, but not before giving us a lore dump. It's unclear if these flashbacks are supposed to be Frog reminiscing and getting over his past baggage internally, or if he's telling this directly to the characters. Either way, it's here we learn that Frog used to be a human named Glenn, an assistant and childhood friend to the greatest knight Guardia has ever known, and original wielder of the Masamune. We see their quest to retrieve the hero's badge, and I love how you get a tiny little glimpse into someone else's moveset that you never meet. Nirvana's Strike isn't in the game, but it sounds like it would be cool. However, in a 2-on-2 battle with Magus, who we see in the flesh for the first time, the Masamune is broken, Cyrus is killed, but Glenn is spared, cursed to live the rest of his life with this failure, and is a talking frog. The hero badge then floats downstream, finding itself with the true hero. It was never Cyrus, it was Glenn the whole time. And presumably why the sword broke when Cyrus was using it. Cliched, sure, but powerful stuff, because much like everything else in Chrono Trigger, it's not the what, it's the how, and it's always been the how. We were already exposed to all of these individual elements before we got here. All of the key players in Frog's backstory. Tons of NPCs don't shut up about Cyrus. So much so that when I was 11 playing this for the first time, I thought that Frog was Cyrus, and just nobody realized. We knew about Magus and Ozzy. We knew about how strong and dangerous they were. We knew Frog felt he was a great disappointment. These are elements all extraordinarily well established to this point. All this flashback is doing is putting the puzzle pieces together. And if the player didn't love Frog already, they certainly do now, and if they still somehow don't, him cutting a mountain in half is pretty cool too. I like the touch that Frog will refuse to equip the Masamune before this cutscene plays. Inside is a little touch, a genius piece of game design where they force you into a fight against some enemies which are only damaged by magical attacks. This gives Frog the opportunity after the battle to comment on your magical abilities, because you would have had to have just used them to win that fight. Unless you happen to remember to backtrack to the end of time to give Frog magic, in which case he doesn't say anything. It's the gentle nudging of the player. Hey, didn't you forget to do something? It's also sort of borrowing a trick from Final Fantasy VI, when they spaz out over Terra's magic. There's also a bat following us now, but don't worry about that. Not important. Magus's castle is the screen which became a million people's desktop wallpapers. A completely unnecessary flourish. They didn't have to make a separate screen for the outside of his castle, but they did, and it freaking rules. Playing this game for the first time, I thought, and I believe that many others thought, that Magus was going to be the final boss. As far as the characters know, they defeat Magus right here, right now. Lavos never happens and the future is saved. The quest to get here has been longer and more complicated than any other quest by far to this point. He has been built up so much trying to drive the idea that this might be the end of the game.
Does the idea of Chrono Trigger being this short sound asinine to you? Well, it should, because you're likely familiar with the game and you know it doesn't end here and you know all the stuff that happens after. But you have to consider that Chrono Trigger is fast as fuck. The amount of things per hour you do in Chrono Trigger is unparalleled by any other game of this era. In fact, at this point in time in Chrono Trigger, I had about 7.5 hours getting to Magus's castle. Now remember, that's me doing extra stuff like climbing the Dactyl's Nest early. That's me pausing to write notes. But I had about 7.5 hours in Chrono Trigger, and up to that point, you have done more things in this game. Like if it ended with Magus, you would have done more things in Chrono Trigger than you would have done in all of Wizardry 5. You would have done more in Chrono Trigger than all of Ys 3. In fact, it would have taken you less time to beat this game too. You would have done more than probably 20 Dungeon Masters. You would have done more than the entirety of a Nindo Way of the Ninja. You would have done more than in the entirety of the Lord of the Rings game. You will have done more in Chrono Trigger than in Super Dante. You will have done more in Chrono Trigger than all of Brain Lord. You will have done more in Chrono Trigger than all of Super Ninja Boy. Than more of Wizardry 6. Done more than in Ultima Runes of Virtue 2. Done more than in all of Eye of the Beholder. Done more than in all of Ultima Savage Empire. Done more than in all of Ultima 6. Done more than all of Arcana. You would have done more in this game than the entirety of Final Fantasy Mystic Quest. You would have done more in this game than everything you do in Lagoon, and it's about the same length, too. You would have done more in this game than everything you did in Draken. Again, another game that's shorter than 7.5 hours. And you would have done more in Chrono Trigger than you would have done in all of Dragonview. Already to this point, you have done more in Chrono Trigger. You have done more story actions than all of these games. So, the idea of it being this short might seem a little crazy, but for games at the time, it really wasn't.
After all this buildup, all the hoopla about Big Bad Magus, you go into his castle, and you're not greeted with a bombastic, overbearing theme. Instead, it's silence. No enemies. In fact, we're greeted with children and King Guardia from 1000, Queen Lean, and Mom? WT fuck? So you have to have Chrono and Frog with you, but the third party member is up to the player, meaning that the third person we see in this hallway depends on who we have with us. Both Marley and Luca see their fathers, but who on earth could Robo see here? We haven't met Mother Brain yet, so that wouldn't make sense. Holy shit, it's Luca. And because we only have one variable party slot, she can't be on our team at the same time. Party composition matters more here than it ever has so far. We have more choices, and they each bring something entirely different. The chicks don't have any physical attacks, but Luca allows you fire coverage for the Magus fight. Marley's ice magic is redundant with Frog's water, but Marley comes with our only consistent healing magic, though Robo has Cure Beam and Shadow Magic, though he doesn't have the Aura World dual tech for AoE healing. In all of Chrono Trigger, there's never a bad party. Whoever's on the bench still levels up, so you don't have to worry about them falling behind. It's the kind of thing where you can bring any party members to any situation and still be fine. The closest thing to a must-bring that isn't storyline related is Luca on the Denendoro Mountains, but even then you can still kill those Ogans without fire, it just takes fucking forever. I chose Marley because ice water shits on this whole place. That bat is still following us, but again, don't worry about that. They make you trudge through a whole bunch of this place before Ozzy shows up and says you have to defeat all 100 of the beasts in Magus's castle. But are there actually 100? I've always wondered, and I can't believe I've never counted.
Well, I counted, and the results are actually more interesting than you might expect. Technically, there are unlimited enemies because of, in those Donkey Kong segments, the roly guys respawn infinitely. So technically, there is no precise number to how many beasts are in Magus's castle. And it also opens up another can of worms. Like, what do we consider a beast? Like, are those 2 fake save points beasts? If we include those, I got 99, and that's including the bosses as well. That's including Flea / Magus Ozzy. I got 99, which makes me think that I messed up because it's this close. I probably just miscounted, or there was like an extra one somewhere that I couldn't find. So, are there 100 monsters in Magus's castle? It's so close that it might as well be, I suppose.
So there's 4 boss fights in this place. We've only had 8 in the entire game up to this point, so cramming a shitload of them here really makes this feel like a true endgame area. Slash is like battling yourself. He uses Chrono's spin cut and slash attacks against you. Pretty boring and straightforward battle otherwise. It's cool that he grabs his sword off the wall halfway through, and you get to keep it after the fight, which is nice. Then there's Flea, which starts with a dummy yellow guy who dies in one hit but steals all of your MP, something to get you a little off balance. Then, oh my god, the bat was Flea. And despite being one of the most minor boss fights in the whole game, Flea is also one of the most talked about because of the gender stuff. And it's something that definitely reads a lot differently now in 2025, or 4 if by some miracle I get this out in 2024. This wouldn't have come across the same way it did 30 years ago is what I'm trying to say. It probably was not their intent to have a non-binary or trans person in their game. I mean, maybe it was, I don't know. But I think Flea is just weird for the sake of being weird, to throw enemies off their game. Think Goldust's original character in WWF. That's why Frog reassures us that they're a threat, to not be thrown off by this trickery. Fight backs up my read too, because their gimmick is status ailments, which is something that doesn't really come into play very much in Chrono Trigger, because by the time they're regularly throwing enemies and bosses which inflict them, you have access to equipment that makes you immune. Flea is one of the only times you actively need to deal with them, as some of your parties become incapacitated. This was a fight I struggled with more than I anticipated. Didn't die. I don't know if it's possible for me to die in this game anymore unless I crank the battle speed all the way up. But Flea had me in a bit of a bind. She doesn't have a ton of HP though, so it's a short one. The rest of the dungeon has some cool set pieces. There are these swinging blade anchors. Couldn't even guess as to what these things are called. The Donkey Kong segments, and of course that room with all the pits, which I would never fall into. But, you know, to show you what's down there, I'll be nice and fall down one. Just have to make sure that you know that I definitely did this on purpose, if the footage doesn't make that obvious. Ozzy's fight is a gimmick. Will you notice that he's not the only thing you can target in this room? If so, then you have already won. He is a joke and he goes out like one. Finally encountering Magus, the game takes away your ability to control its text boxes for the first time, so his dialogue is timed to the music. Very cool touch. Frog's line about enjoying his new form is great because it shows his growth from cowering, depressed Frog. He's overcome his curse. Being a frogman has its benefits and he's made the most of it. Magus is a contender for toughest boss in the game, rightfully so. This guy had to be a powerhouse for this story beat to work, and he is. Guy has 2 forms, but the battle doesn't officially break up in between them. The first one is like a game of Simon Says. He attacks you with one element, and you need to hit him back with the same. If he chooses one you don't have access to, which for me right now is Fire and Shadow, then you have to hit him with a physical attack because that causes him to counter with an AoE random element. It's interesting because normally counterattacks are something you're trained to avoid, but you are forced to trigger his because there is no possible way to cover all 4 elements with only 3 party slots. Your health is also continuously rolling down the entire time. It's slow, which means that it doesn't matter as much as you think it might, but over the course of the entire battle, this adds up. The key is you can control when you take the lion's share of damage for this first phase because his counterattacks are what's going to kill you. You just need to be patient and make sure you have most of your health when triggering his moves. The second phase is more freewheeling, as in you don't have to mess around just to damage him, but he starts charging up his giant fuck you attack, which is unavoidable, and almost is enough to wipe my entire party from full, but not quite enough, so we win, and then learn that Magus did not create Lavos, he was just trying to summon him. We don't know why yet, but it can't possibly be good, right? And if Lavos already existed, then where did he come from? Something the next quest is going to answer. Marley then becomes our mother, nagging us out of bed, the mark of any great JRPG, beginning when you're nagged out of bed by your mother, symbolizing the start of another adventure, because the Magus arc has officially closed. The next part of Chrono Trigger is like staying up extremely late. I'm talking like 3, 4 in the morning, goblin hours, knowing that you have to be up at a certain time the next day, so you pathetically, meekly take out your phone and set an alarm for 2.5 hours in the future. You know tomorrow's gonna suck, but you just have to get over it. After we're all shagged out from constant forced battles, banging with Slash, Flea, Ozzy, and Magus all night long, after the most grueling and lengthy challenge we've dealt with so far, it's time to do it all again. There is basically nothing between Magus's castle and the next crazy long and arduous dungeon. Sure, I guess you could explore the caveman village, but we were just here, so there's not really anything else going on yet, or ever really. The Dactyl's Nest is short and fairly painless, after which Isla joins our party permanently, and you're allowed to fly around for the first time in this game. A shame, because it's in 65 million BC, and there is nothing to see on this map aside from the Sun Shrine, which is just a cave with Zada in it. Then inside the mighty Tyranno lair. I already commented on how it's interesting that the reptiles are so far and away advanced past humans in this time, and seeing their elaborate castle here raises the question, in the player's mind, how the hell do the reptiles end up losing this war? If 65 million BC's whole thing is the war between survival between humans and reptiles, how the fuck do the humans manage to win? Because they have to, right? Or else there would be no other humans in any other time. But they're at such a severe physical and technological advantage. The way the trope goes is one race is strong technologically, the other race is strong physically. Think the Saiyan War in Dragon Ball. I don't know, maybe Isla rips them all in half. Like how instead of hitting the switch on the wall right here to free Kino, she climbs inside of his cell, then breaks open the bars with her bare hands. Epic stuff. This place is designed sort of like that factory we were at earlier, in that the first room has two different directions to go in. One is locked while the other one leads to our key. In this case, we actually need that key to continue though. After that, the Tyranno lair is just a whole bunch of forced battles. There are some cute interactions which lead to avoidance, such as hitting these switches as soon as the enemies appear on screen so they fall down pits, or these other rooms with two different switches to choose from where one of them opens up the way and the other triggers an encounter. Losers like me who have these memorized can skip these fights, but first time players, it's a coin flip and they might have to do every single one in this whole place. Forced battles are a trick Chrono Trigger pulls out when it either A, wants the player to gain some serious experience points, or B, wants to make the area feel like much more of an ordeal than it actually is. And in quick succession, having the player do Magus's castle, then the Tyranno lair, really tires the player out, especially if they're doing both in one sitting. Doesn't help that our most common enemy are these dinosaurs, which you have to lower their defenses with lightning before they actually take any damage, resulting in battles which take longer than normal. The rematch with Nizbel is kind of funny. At least I remembered his lines being funny. Nizbel, are you fucking stupid? Anyway, it's a recycled fight with more or less the same mechanics as before. Snooze. So the Tyranno lair is pretty easily my least favorite dungeon in this game. Like, whenever I would play this game on New Game Plus, I remember always groaning whenever I got here because I didn't want to replay it. Not that it's bad, it's more so that it's just needlessly drawn out. But needlessly drawn out for Chrono Trigger is still pretty good in the grand scheme of things, so is this place really that bad? No, it's just that the standards this game have set have been so high that this one falls just a little short. Then to conclude, the most drawn out area in the game is the most drawn out boss. Azala and the Black Tyranno is one of the very few what the fuck were they thinking moments in this game. Like seriously, what the fuck were they thinking with these guys? For the first phase, I don't even know what is supposed to kill you because both of their attacks do so little damage. Then the second phase, he counts down and announces his one and only attack for like a full hour before hitting you with it. You'd have to purposefully not be healing to ever die during this. And he has so much goddamned HP. Even playing on Frank's save file, which is at max level, this guy took 8 turns. Why so many? I'm one-shotting most of these boss fights with Frank. Despite his high HP, it's one of the easiest fights in the entire game. He just takes forever because of this, so it feels like even though it's piss easy, you had an epic battle. Now, it might sound like I'm being overly negative towards all this caveman shit in 65 million BC, but I actually think that in sort of a roundabout way, it works in the game's favor because it makes what's about to happen hit twice as hard. In an incredibly fancy Mode 7 cutscene, we learn that Lavos came from outer space and was the meteor that killed the dinosaurs, working in real-life lore into the plot of the game. That's how the reptiles lose. Isla then says something which has always bothered me. Isla's word. La mean fire, Vos mean big. What? Hold on a second. Isla speaks our language. There is no separate caveman talk where she could have drawn this from. Chrono Trigger, for simplicity, exists in a one-language world. Just so you can talk to everyone, you know, time travel. It'd get confusing if everybody had their own language. You know she's a cave woman because her English is mostly normal, only like Kevin from The Office, you know, why use many word when few word do trick. Ooga booga, people were dumber back then. They had less words. Just that whole trope. Lavos physically smashes into their home, and Azala predicts that the resulting ice age will wipe out the reptiles, which proves to be true. Like any other story thread in this game, it was divine intervention by Lavos himself. The humans didn't really defeat the reptiles, Lavos did. The humans didn't really defeat Magus either, Lavos did. At least in the timeline before we messed with it. It's a good thing they set up these caveman times before this exact quest, and the way the game handles it is a bit weird, because it's like, you're introduced to the cavemen, then you do Magus, then you conclude the cavemen quest. That's a bit weird, right? And I wonder why they did that. I mean, they couldn't have you do the entire reptile quest the first time you were there, because it would spoil all of the tension for the Magus fight, because at that point you still think he's going to be the final boss. In order to keep up that illusion, they had to postpone the end of the reptile quest until after the reveal that Magus is not, in fact, the final boss of the game. And I don't think you could have Magus, like, you do Magus and then you just do the entire reptile quest. I think it's smart the way they handled it. The way that you meet Isla, and then you feel like, even though you weren't really gone for that long, you feel like you were gone for a long time, because a lot of shit happens in the Magus quest. And then you come back and conclude her storyline. It makes it feel complete. So Lavos' arrival crafted a time portal. And when monkeys see time portal, I don't know, you make lemonade. Ah, crap. We're in Buffalo. This is pretty much the greatest thing to ever happen in any game. And it's structured just like the fair at the start. Your task, strictly speaking, is to talk to one person, put a thing in a thing, and then you don't even have to win the boss fight. But now, because it's not the start of the game anymore, where you may or may not even care about anything, anyone playing the game at this point actually wants to talk to everyone, because you want to know what the fuck is going on here. All of those chests, all of those well-dressed men, being warned that a long time ago humans used to be able to use magic, but they abused their powers and they got taken away. All of these mysteries, and finally we're getting some fucking answers around here. Crazy. They withheld the most interesting time period until the end, after wearing you down with 2 back-to-back, lengthy, girthy gauntlets, pumping you full of battles. Like a blast of air conditioning on a 110-degree day. Zeal is the most thirst-quenching quest to ever exist in an RPG. Like finally coming after edging for 9 whole hours. Try not to come any longer. There are no required battles. There is no objective for the characters. There's no dungeon. We get like one half little cutscene before the boss. But other than that, it's just a half hour of talking to people. Which admittedly, when I speak it out dryly like that, sounds like it could fucking suck. But because they have been building to this moment the entire game, the whole place is carried by your natural interest in what Zeal is. It's really simple, but games didn't and often still don't do this. Step 1, create interest in a thing. Step 2, build on that interest in compounding ways. Step 3, pay it off. That's all they've done here. But how often when you're playing through an RPG do you get to a story moment that's supposed to be a twist, and maybe it is a twist in the fact that you didn't see it coming, but it's also not something that you care about because there was no build to it whatsoever. So your reaction is just kind of like, like, why do I care? Like in Arcana, when your party betrays you for the 50th time this chapter. Or in Lagoon, when your mission abruptly changes from cleaning the muddy water to rescuing this princess we just met in one cutscene. Or in the 7th Saga, when it turns out that the king is actually an ancient wizard who tried to rule the world centuries ago, who was reincarnated in some confusing time loop that the game ends with. Or in Front Mission, when it turns out that your mech's computers are actually sacrificed human brains turned into a robot. Or in Zack, Art of the Visual Stage, when the game ends suddenly without you even killing the main bad guy. Or in Ys 5, when you gather all of the things, but there's actually one final thing for you to get, which takes longer than all of the other things you've already got combined because they realized they made the game too short. Or in Final Fantasy IV, when there is a whole separate overworld with a corresponding set of magical crystals underground. Or in Final Fantasy IV, when you end up on the moon. Or in Final Fantasy IV, when they kill off every single major character just to bring them back 15 minutes later. Or in Final Fantasy IV, when Golbez is actually Cecil's brother even though nobody has mentioned anything about him having a brother to this point. Or in Final Fantasy IV, when it turns out that Golbez is a worthless jobber loser anyway, and Zemus is the actual villain. Or in Final Fantasy IV, when Zemus turns out to actually not be the villain, instead it's an even eviler guy named Zeromus. Zeromus? Or in Final Fantasy V, when there's like a whole alternate dimension that also has another set of crystals. Or in Final Fantasy VI, when it turns out that the balance of the entire planet relies on these 3 statues on a cliff for some reason. Or in Ultima, the Black Gate, when it turns out that the church was actually evil. Or in Breath of Fire 2, when it turns out that the church was actually evil. Or in Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy War, when it turns out that the church was actually evil. Or in Shin Megami Tensei, when it turns out that the church was actually evil. Or in Shin Megami Tensei 2, when it turns out that the church was actually evil. Or in Shin Megami Tensei If, when it turns out that the church is actually pretty cool and doesn't mess with you at all. Or in Dragon Quest VI, when you defeat the Demon Lord only for the game to continue because there's, quote, still evil in this world. Or in Uncharted Waters New Horizons, when it turns out that your dad is actually alive and he knows about this giant pirate convoy that wants to specifically fuck your shit up. Or in The Lord of the Rings Volume 1, when they didn't just use the eagles to fly the ring to Mordor. Or in Live Alive, when really anything that happens in the last 2 chapters happens. Or in Ogre Battle, when not one thing ever happens in the entire game, despite everyone saying it is a great story. Or in Tactics Ogre, when you win the war you've been fighting this entire time, only to have to climb that big dumb tower, because some guy who may or may not have been the protagonist in the last game wants to have the pirate's gold. Or in Ultima Savage Empire, when it turns out you could have just killed the ants the entire time, and gathering all the village chiefs actually did nothing. Or in Zardion, when it turns out that, in fact, the whole game was just a simulation on some supercomputer. Or the biggest twist of them all, in Harvest Moon, when someone actually wants to date and then marry you. These just don't make any sense. They come out of nowhere, they're not built up, and they only exist so there can be more game. Chrono Trigger, on the other hand, has been planting the seeds for Zeal the entire game. Why is Melchior's name on the sword? Well, because he made it in Zeal. Why can't I open these chests? Oh, because Zeal magic. Who is Magus, and why is this human in charge of all the wizards? Oh, because he's Queen Zeal's son. Why can't people use magic anymore? Oh, because the citizens of Zeal were shitheads that engaged in slave labor and flew far too close to Lavos. The lesson here is to know exactly where your story is going to go before writing it, because if you don't have a story, you just have a series of events. And the vast majority of video game stories to me feel like just a series of events. Of course, the Zeal theme, as I talked about earlier, really makes this whole scene too. We don't hear this sitar-like instrument in any other song, and it just sounds magical. When you hear this, there is some important shit going down. By talking to people, we learn that one among us will shortly perish, and we know he has to be talking about Chrono because he's the only one who's required to be in the party. We learn that the Queen used to be cool until they discovered that Lavos was a better source of energy than the sun, and she has become an evil tyrant since then, exiling and jailing anyone who opposes using this new energy source. Also, recently a mysterious prophet has appeared and quickly earned her trust by accurately predicting the future. We meet her two kids, that little boy who said we're going to die soon, and Shala, a character which makes an incredibly strong first impression because, well, she looks unique, she agrees with her brother that everything's fucked. When walking away, she actually seems interested in the party as opposed to this random NPC who calls us primitive. She has her own theme song, and she's hyped up by NPCs as the greatest and most powerful magic user among a kingdom made up solely of magic users. She has Marley's pendant, which is also the impetus of our next puzzle. Shala's pendant opens doors with that crest we've been seeing all game long, but ours does not. The difference, hers has the power of Lavos, so we toss ours into Zeal's Lavos power-sucking machine, and voila! Now we can finally open the doors and chests with that crest on it, but not before a boss fight the game expects you to lose. The villains of this era are all passive-aggressive. Up until this point, when there is a fight to be had, you just duke it out then and there. But here we have Queen Zeal and Dalton, both new characters, new villains which run away from you basically at every turn. Instead of fighting you himself, Dalton summons this golem, which copies your every move. The key to winning is to use that against him. At this point, you have access to armor, which cuts fire damage by 50%. So if you wear that and only hit him with fire attacks, he can barely even hurt you. There is nothing to be gained from winning this because either way you're sealed by some plot magic and thrown out of this time period by the same gates you used to get in here. With our way into this time period sealed off, our next objective is to get back in there because it was clearly the most interesting time to be in, and some shit with Lavos was about to go down. The game, perhaps believing that the way forward at this point was a bit too cryptic, then flashes the exact door we might have saw earlier if we chose to do the sewer in the future early. But I really don't think that's necessary because now begins one of the greatest and most satisfying treasure hunts in RPG history. We might have gotten thrown out of Zeal, but the magic is far from over because now we finally have the key to all of those chests, all of those doors the game has been feeding us all game long. Finally, we're about to open a whole bunch of things, so we're time-trotting, globe-trotting all around the game, just trying to remember all the locations of those chests and doors that we saw. This adventure allows us to see all the changes to the world. In 600, the war is over, and I like the interaction in that monster porn guy's house, where this lady remarks that the real hero who defeated Magus must have been some kind of handsome knight, to which Frog remarks on this irony. If you talk to that asshole shit-talking frog at the bar earlier, he sings a different tune now. As an aside, powering up the chests never made sense to me. I get that you're like infusing the equipment with some of Lavos's energy to power them up, but who on earth would ever say no to picking up equipment unless they're using a guide which tells them to? I know I never would have guessed to do this. Medina now worships a statue of Ozzy instead of Magus, but not quite as feverishly as there's less people doing it this time. You can speak to your mom to see how she reacts to all your new friends. My favorite is Frog's. Calls him a toad, to which Frog doesn't even have an answer. He just gets sad. If you take Marley back to the castle, you learn that Chrono has been temporarily pardoned, but Marley's daddy issues persist. In fact, they're worse than ever, with her accusing him of killing her mother, and him saying she's trying to kill him with some beef jerky because he has high cholesterol. That seed has sprouted in the future, and everyone seems to be in higher spirits about that. One of them even became courageous enough to cross those ruins to give another seed to the people in that depressing dome where they didn't even move. This whole treasure hunting excursion is like the Zeal quest continued, because there's no forced battles, there's no story moments that you have to do, there's not even like a real defined goal or objective. It's just to find your way back into Zeal, which lies behind one of these doors, so you might as well try and open all of them, right? It really is remarkable that after the Tyranno Lair and Magus, back to back, those two bone-crunching gauntlets, they just give you like a 2-hour break that just consists of talking to NPCs and looking for treasure chests? That's weird, right? It's not every day in an RPG you're just allowed to take a breather like this. And it's such a great time. And of course, the genius of Chrono Trigger, it's designed in a way that you only have to engage with as little of this as possible. You don't have to do pretty much any of this shit. So like in a New Game Plus playthrough, you can just critical path in a minute. Or your first time player, you're spending like an hour and a half looking for all the treasure chests. It's crazy how they designed this game around New Game Plus. It's freaking awesome. You can also revive that forest now, but I'll cover that when we do all of the side quests later. In the future, that weird old man who didn't make any sense earlier was actually one of 3 wise men who led Zeal before the queen went crazy. He has been trapped in the future forever, working on a time machine, to which he succeeds, yay, but dies as soon as it's completed. Now that there is a loose time machine with no owner, it's a perfect opportunity for us to swipe it and make our way back to Zeal, the Magic Kingdom. He also left us a nice lore dump about Lavos, about how he's actually a parasite that feeds off the planet's energy until it's all used up, then sends its spawn off to other planets to do the same. The main villain isn't really a character, it's a bug that's just doing what it's programmed biologically to do. It isn't like a thinking, sentient being, it's an animal. It's just gaining nutrients the only way it knows how and defending itself when attacked. Ultimately, the solution to this Lavos problem ends up being to grow powerful enough to squash the bug. You're not fighting an evil mastermind, you're fighting essentially a giant tapeworm. It's interesting that our time machine calls 12,000 BC the Dark Ages. We were just there, and it was anything but dark, though with every great society, there's always a hidden underbelly, I suppose. The game smartly does not allow you to go to the Earthbound One's village your first trip here, because it's supposed to be a magical encounter. You hear about these people from NPCs in Zeal, like this guy who says that they're being allowed to work on the Ocean Palace, so they do have a purpose after all. So dehumanizing. The idea is these people cannot use magic, so they're lesser beings. So in turn, it's okay to exploit them. Dark Ages stuff indeed. If Chrono Trigger has any flaws, not saying that it does, aside from all of the stuff I've nitpicked about it in this video, it is that the second half of the game has too many boss fights, and this little goblin right here is my prime example. Yeah, this Mud Imp has to be my least favorite fight in the entire game. He is pure filler. The fight is not interesting. He doesn't tie into anything else. You could cut this entire thing and area and the game wouldn't miss it. It's rare in which you can spotlight things in Chrono Trigger which serve no purpose whatsoever, which have no point, because it is such a concise game. But here's one. Screw this guy. He takes forever to kill, too. So I guess I'll use this opportunity to speak about the battle system a little more. They did a good job not having different abilities replace each other. Like here, I'm still finding a use for Chrono's slash attack, which we get minutes after starting the game. If you target all 3 of these guys with an AoE, they counterattack, but they don't if you just do 2, so that's why I'm using slash here as opposed to something else. Then Mount Woe is weird because it's less of a dungeon and more of a way to feed the player experience points. The enemies are piss easy, piss colored too, but they hand out some of the most EXP and TP in the entire game. It's also a great visual, a mountain which would be floating up with the rest of Zeal if it weren't being tied down to the planet by a giant chain. The boss, however, has a reputation for being the toughest fight in the entire game, and I don't know why. Maybe it is if you don't know what you're doing, but it's basically just the Guardian fight from way earlier at the food storage again. You just have to take out the hands and it can't do anything. Bring Isla, use Falcon Strike, and this guy is a joke. But if you don't know that, his counterattack catches you off guard, you could die. I guess I get how this could be considered hard. Then a big reveal. Turns out the guru you were sent here to save is actually Melchior, our friend from the future. After that, the Ocean Palace is a return to those giant-ass gauntlets the game has so graciously just given us a break from, but this time you can avoid way more enemies than in those other huge areas. I think the most interesting new thing you fight here are the scouts, which are only weak to the color that they are. Yellow for lightning, blue for water, and red for, Chrono's red katana. What else would it be? This place feels like another climax. As epic, if not more so, than Magus's castle. Design-wise, it's not all that much. There's a couple parts where you have to hit a switch. There's one of those elevators where you're forced to fight a bunch of battles in a row. Though, if you look at the map, it really is just a big straight line. I love the theme of dissension, like you're actually burrowing deep underground to your final confrontation with Lavos. Oh yeah, and I forgot you had to fight Dalton just to get in here. I forgot about him because he sucks. I don't know. As a character, he's okay. If we ignore all of the supplemental crap they added to this game in the other versions, then Dalton's okay. He has a chip on his shoulder because the new prophet took his place as the Queen's right-hand man, and he tries to take it out on you or anyone he can. The boss after doing the area, though, is two of those golems a first-time player would have presumably lost to earlier. Only now they've been treasure hunting for all of that kick-ass equipment, and Mount Woe showered their party with enough experience points to level up like 6 times. Since I am a professional gamer, after my first plan failed to focus on physical attacks because they hit back harder than I expected, I decided to cheese it by only attacking with water and then absorbing the magic they shot back at me. After that is the biggest scene and reveal in the entire game, that we actually created the Masamune by trying to destroy the Lavos-sucking machine with a knife. Mind-blowing. Nah, just kidding. The real twist is that the prophet was actually Magus. Crazy! Hold on a second. Magus's huge plan, the Master Sorcerer, was to summon Lavos and then hit him with a scythe? Dude, are you retarded? That was the twist. The twist was that Magus was actually stupid. Oh yeah, Chrono fucking dies! Yeah, I guess that's sort of an important twist. Chrono, our silent protagonist, has exactly one personality trait. He's brave. Everything else you can graft whatever you want onto him, but we have seen time and time again at the fair picking up the pendant to go after Marley, breaking out of prison, in the future deciding to go after Lavos, facing off against Masa and Moon to win the Masamune, battling Magus, battling the reptiles, even as recently as the cutscene which plays in the Earthbound's village where he shakes his head and agrees to save Shala. He's silent, so we don't get much, but just by virtue of being a video game protagonist, he has to be brave. Even Lester the Unlikely is brave because they're doing the heroic actions of the player. They're the ones making stuff happen. Video games are about being the hero and doing heroic things, so Chrono is a heroic character because of the heroic shit he does, even if it's just the player. No other larger act of heroism than sacrificing himself here to block Lavos' attack. And just like that, your stand-in character disintegrates. He's gone, donezo, poof, no longer in the party. Elvis has left the building. Alright, so I have a story about Chrono Trigger that's probably not very interesting about how I found the game originally. I didn't know that Chrono, the character, was from a video game. I just knew him from Newgrounds.com, right? Because a lot of people used to put Chrono in their cartoons. So I didn't have the internet as a kid really until super late, until like 2008, I'm talking. My family didn't have the internet. So my exposure to most of the internet was at other people's houses. I would just see things there. And one of my friends loved Newgrounds, so we would just watch Newgrounds cartoons all the time. And I remember seeing this Chrono character in a whole bunch of them, especially in this one called VG High, like Video Games High School. It was like a series where it was just a bunch of like video game characters, but the main guy was Chrono, and I didn't know who that was until later when I had a computer the whole time. The computer just didn't have internet, and I had SNES 9X on the computer that I had, but I didn't have like every game. It was just like a predetermined list, like a preset list of like 40 ROMs. That's what I had on it. And Chrono Trigger was not one of those ROMs. Breath of Fire was one of those ROMs, and I played the fuck out of Breath of Fire, but Chrono Trigger was not. So one day, eventually I figured out that Chrono Trigger was a game. It was a Super Nintendo game, and that's where this Chrono character from Newgrounds came from. So I went to school and used the computer lab, and I downloaded the Chrono Trigger ROM from the school computer lab computer. I was probably in like 7th grade, and I brought in blank CDs, and I burned the Chrono Trigger ROM to a blank CD, and then I put that blank CD in my computer, and that's how I played Chrono Trigger for the first time. And it fucking blew me away. Compared to Breath of Fire, this was the fucking greatest video game ever made. Compared to anything else on the Super Nintendo, I would come to find out, this was like the greatest fucking game ever made. So I played through Chrono Trigger a few times on like ZSNES or SNES 9X or whatever on my computer, and I loved it. But then one day, I'm with my grandma, and I go into a game store. It wasn't a GameStop. It was like an independent game store. And I see Chrono Trigger for DS, and I flip the fuck out. I start going like ape shit in the store, like, because I couldn't believe that was a thing. It must have just come out. I went ballistic seeing this game. Of course, I was a kid. I didn't have money. I didn't get it then and there. But my grandma got it for me for my birthday, which was like a couple months later. And Chrono Trigger DS is the version that I've played by far the most of, because it lived inside of my DS for literally years. I was such a freak with that game that I even like unlocked all of the items and filled out the bestiary and did all that dumb bullshit. And I am not someone who does that for any game ever. So we awake in a world without Chrono. He's not coming back. Seriously. And I'm not making this up. Our party members are so distraught in a cutscene with no player agency, they job to a guy which I forgot about moments ago. We end up locked up, not unlike Chrono was way back around minute 26 or so of this very video. And just like then, there are two methods of escape. You can either play sick, which causes the guards to come and check on you. Wait a second, Robo is the one who pretends to be sick with this party? That is hilarious. But now I'm curious, I want to see who else can get sick. So next I tried it with Frog, Marley, and Luca. There's something pretty funny about Frog exclaiming, "Confound it, the money too," which just cracks me up. He transforms into Yosemite Sam for one line. Luca's the one who plays sick here, so naturally then I tried Frog, Isla, and Marley, the only three characters we haven't seen do this, and it's Isla. Wow, the one I would least expect. She sort of does it. She just screams, "Voo, ... Isla, ... hurt bad." How did this trick him? Aw, she feels bad about it too. One of the only real character moments for her in the entire game. The Blackbird is one of the more controversial parts because it really doesn't make sense how you got yourself into this scenario. Our characters are all strong as fuck by now and we just kicked Dalton's ass before the last dungeon, so losing to him in a cutscene is kind of a slap in the face. They take your weapons too, so it's also meant to be sort of a stealth mission. If you brought Isla, you could ignore this because she's the only one the game allows to fight without weapons. But shouldn't the other characters still be able to use magic here? It doesn't really add up. And just, in fact, by being a stealth mission in a non-stealth oriented game, it's gonna be hated by some. That's just the nature of the beast.
Plus, the party's breaking out of prison can't be cooler than when Chrono did it, right? Chrono is the epitome of cool, unlike these losers that are also cool. Let Chrono have his one thing. The man's dead. Let him have the cooler prison escape.
Contrived reasons aside, I like this part. I'm not sure it's in the stronger half of Chrono Trigger quests, but it's nowhere near as annoying as some people have made it out to be. It's a maze, but it's just a tiny grid of rooms. Some contain various parts of your stuff, so you find all the chests, you get your stuff back. One of these are hidden in a room you don't have access to through the connecting hallways, so you have to climb through the air duct to get down to it. And the game warns you if you try to leave before finding everything, so you would have to be negligent to escape without any of it. There's also a hidden scene you can view where Dalton is instructing his team to give your time machine the ability to fly. Then to cap this place off, there's a double boss fight, which is more of a double bluff. The purple golem guy is a literal joke, he doesn't even attack you, and Dalton sucks worse than the last time you fought him. After the Ocean Palace, all the fights in the Blackbird are a relief. Despite the party being in a perilous situation, storyline-wise, this tension is undercut by the fact that you are never actually in any danger. You will not die in this place. You would have to intentionally get into a battle, then set the controller down and do nothing. That's the only way. After the fight, Dalton gets sucked into a portal, then we never see him ever again. Nope, he's gone. Forever. Just like Chrono, he definitely does not travel through time or raise any armies or anything. Nope. That's it. Next is the MAGUS scene. He survived the Lavos incident too, and lays on the rest of his backstory. He was Queen Zeal's son who got sucked into a time warp with the three wise men and transported to 600, where he was raised by Ozzy the Great. He wanted to summon Lavos to kill it, so he has the exact same goal as us, turns out. Then you're given a choice to fight him or no. After hearing Magus's equally tragic backstory to Frogs, do we still want revenge? This is the first and arguably only branching path moment in the entire game. If you chose revenge, I mean, fair enough, that was Frog's entire life's work. And if you watch my channel, you probably know how much I love these tense one-on-one boss encounters in RPGs. Now that we've seen both characters' stories, they're both sympathetic in a way, even though Magus has been one of the bad guys standing in our way the whole game. You have to admit, he is pretty fucking cool, and we did just lose our best party member, so welcome aboard.
It is exceedingly rare that I choose to kill Magus here. I did not by some miracle on my first playthrough, which I think most people do, and I don't in 99 out of 100 of them. And I didn't again in this one.
We are then given the option to rename Magus, which really doesn't make any sense, as we've been calling him Magus the entire game so far. Magus. Magus, Magus, Magus. Magus, 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 Magus. I know my pronunciation gets under someone's skin, so that was for you. Alright, Chrono's dead, but so what? Big whoop. We're time travelers, we can fix this, right? Like how we fixed Marley, which was a problem we also caused, so that was pretty much a net neutral. Or how we won the Mystic War in 600, which it turns out the humans won anyway without us ever time traveling. Or how about how we won the Reptile War, which didn't matter because the Ice Age killed them off anyway. Or how about how we saved Melchior, just so we could get sucked into a time portal and end up in the same place anyway.
We really didn't do shit, did we? Now, chuckleheads like Zero Punctuation like to point this out as some sort of got 'em moment, like, see, here's a fatal flaw with Chrono Trigger. You don't do anything. You travel through time, but you didn't actually affect anything. Not playing far enough into the game to realize that that is kind of the whole point.
Because now begins the part of the game where you actually do change shit. Robo at the famous campfire scene remarks that the places we've been able to time travel to feel intentional, like some being wanted us to specifically see those moments. The game designers. You've been seeing every key event that led to the planet's destruction and were unable to do anything about it. That's about to change, starting with getting Chrono back. The three wise men, named after the Jesus wise men, give us three gifts. Melchior the sword, Balthazar the time machine, and Gaspar the Chrono Trigger. He said it.
People like to call this quest optional or hidden or cryptic. No, bullshit. The only way you wouldn't get Chrono back is if you don't want Chrono back. The game clearly points you in the direction to reviving him.
In order to revive Chrono, you need a look-alike of him, and you have to climb Death Peak in the future with the Chrono Trigger. Game makes it pretty clear. You get a clone from Norstein Beckler, the magician at the fair from the start of the game. You could have already won the dummy clone, actually, if you were strenuous at the start. We never learn who Beckler is, but he's no doubt some kind of weird time travel aware agent. Why else would Balthazar know who this guy is? Was he a Zeal refugee? I don't know. We'll never know. That's one of Chrono Trigger's unexplained mysteries, and one which by some miracle is not ruined by any extemporaneous bullshit. Death Peak as an area is most similar to the Denendoro Mountains in that they're both mountains, and a collection of unavoidable fights, which is pretty normal for this stage in the game. There's a cool few set pieces though. The Lavos spawn, which counterattack any strikes to the shell. The game always defaults to targeting that too, so you need to be extra careful not to mash through selecting your attack. There's the part where if you fall off that windy cliff, you have to start the whole game all over again.
Shout out to RPG Classics for that joke. I have not needed a walkthrough for this game in probably 15 years, so I didn't reread it for this, but I do remember that one joke. Basically everything in this video, if it sounded smart, I probably got it from the reverse design article, which is something that, again, I didn't reread for this, but the thing with Chrono Trigger is I've played it so many times and I've consumed so much media about this game that it all just kind of gets baked in and I don't know what came from where, but this joke I remembered. So yeah, anything funny came from the RPG Classics walkthrough, anything smart came from reverse design, and yeah, basically, I probably just ripped off everything in this video.
Then at the top, no boss fight.
It wasn't just the return of Chrono. It was the return of me to my old stomping grounds, doing the same things I was doing when I was level 12.
Oh yeah, you're a sociopath if you don't bring Marley, by the way. You have no soul, and I want you to leave right now. Of course, every character has their heartwarming scene with Chrono, but Marley is the only one which matters, and I'm not even curious as to which the other ones are. So yay, Chrono's back. You're not forced to have him in your party anymore, but I pretty much always do anyway.
Welcome to the non-linear part, where Chrono Trigger goes from great game to greatest game, a trick they learned from Final Fantasy III. Except the trope actually goes back way further than that. Hell, I just reviewed Dragon Warrior 2, and that does the whole linear beginning branching out into non-linear second half. And the original Phantasy Star is another example, and, well, you know what, I could name a whole bunch of other games that do this, but do we really need another bit where I list off like 20 more games? No, there's been enough of that.
From here on, there are a bunch of quests we can do in any order we want, or we can choose to not do them at all, because the only point of anything, practically speaking, from here on out, is to get yourself strong enough to beat Lavos, because you sure as shit are not now. The other alternate reason are these quests allow us to wrap up each character's story arc, which Chrono Trigger is certainly not a character-led story, but they do exist and they are here and they're all fun. Each one is distinct and everyone has two separate sides to them. You've got what makes each one of them cool, but you've also got which makes each one of them vulnerable. Starting with Marley, she's cool because, well, for one, she's a girl that wants to go on a date with you. This is not a thing that happens. I still brag about the time a girl I had never seen before asked me out 10 years ago. Yes, I really am that much of a loser. Being a princess, but trying to escape what that means is also cool. But we do see that she has a temper from the various times she screams throughout the game. She can be ditzy, as seen when she randomly presses buttons on the day of Lavo's computer in the future. Her home life sucks and nobody listens to her. She doesn't even hold enough sway at home to get Chrono out of jail. For a princess, that's sad. And when you first find her in 600, she seems to get a kick out of actually being able to boss those guards around. Have you ever felt not listened to or straight up ignored because of who you are? That shit sucks. And her plight is relatable to mostly everyone, I would imagine. Her quest is about fixing the relationship with her father. Ironically, not with any time travel shenanigans, which is not the route you would expect Chrono Trigger to take. But when you stop and think about it, they don't really take the easy way out when solving our characters' personal dramas. And that's something I respect about Chrono Trigger quite a bit. We're time travelers, so you would think that they would find a solution somewhere which involves traveling back in time to manipulate the king into being a better father, sort of like the beef jerky quest, where if you give a piece of expensive jerky to a woman in 600, her ancestor is then nice enough to give you the sunstone now. You know, like social engineering. By and large, Chrono Trigger takes the realistic option, that the only way to fix your baggage is to confront it and get over it. Make amends with the people in your life that you have to and move on with yourself. Marley is the bigger man in this relationship. She's not too cowardly to pardon Chrono outright when he obviously didn't do anything wrong, like the king was. She doesn't disown him for suggesting that he killed their mother. That's what the king said to her. Then when learning that the king is on trial, it could have been easy for her to say, well, fuck him, I hate that asshole. He's the reason I'm so twisted today. Look at me, I had a fucked up childhood, and to wallow in her own self-pity about how sad she is. But she doesn't do that. She goes to clear his name and make amends. That's real shit. Chrono Trigger's a great game sometimes. Also, if you try to order food in the castle, you learn that there is a meal called the Chrono Special, named after yourself and your heroics in the Middle Ages. The irony being that they would throw you in jail to be executed despite being like this legendary hero of the kingdom. And in general, it's interesting how you're a wanted fugitive for most of the game in your present era, yet everywhere else you become a beloved mythical being. Like in 600, they love you there, where another hero, Frog, already had most of his character stuff. But we do get a side quest with him fixing Cyrus's hedgestone. The quest is a little wonky, time travel puzzle to get the tools, hire a contractor, then go and kill some monsters, pay the carpenter again, kill more monsters, pay the carpenter again, kill more monsters, a kill again. I like bringing Magus to this. Cyrus, the fool who challenged Magus, rests here. Fucking high five, dude. Having Magus in your party in 600 is just awkward all around. Like, you can go to the castle and they don't even bat an eye. What are you trying to say? That Magus did a fine job? That Magus should stay as long as he wants? Magus is always welcome here? Weren't we just at war? Maybe they don't know what he looks like. There's also Ozzy's fort, which is like a parody of Magus's fort. It's on an island right next to his and is shittier in every way. The whole place is just an excuse to tell some jokes and have one boss fight, albeit a decent one. No matter who you attack, they counter with a triple tech, so you have to hyper focus on one of them. Probably Flea because she has the least amount of health to get them to stop. Then a random cat hits the switch behind him and Ozzy dies. a callback to his fight in Magus's castle. If you go to 1000, that monster village now respects humans. You can stay at the inn, you can buy stuff at the store, not that there's anything good, and they're even building a port so they can get the ferry service. See, that's a real change for the better. You did that. We're having a real effect on the world now. I'll also point out that after the Ocean Palace quest, which resulted in that structure being raised into the sky, there is now dialogue in both 600 and 1000 with people remarking on how great it looks in the sky, or how it brings good fortune, or something along those lines, which is a great touch because as far as they know, it has always been there. But because you are from a timeline where it hasn't, it just acts as a reminder to the time that Chrono fucking died. Speaking of, the first time I played this, I thought Luca's mom fucking died. But nope, you're just saving her from being crippled. You could have talked to her at any time inside of Luca's house. I just never connected the dots as a kid. You ever think back and wonder how if you did something differently, where you'd be now? Like if you were different as a child, maybe you could have, I don't know, gone to Harvard and not had to deliver pizzas or dig trenches in the present day. Or if you bought Bitcoin in 2009 and then sold on the highs and bought the lows, how you'd be filthy stinking rich. And then like imagine what you'd do if you were filthy stinking rich. Well, that's not how Luca thinks. If she could go back, she would fix her mom's life. Now, I'm selfish. If I went back in time, it would be to fix my shit. But not Luca. She has lived with the guilt of her mother's accident her whole life, and that's the thing she wants to change. One of Robo's quests is what gets us here. In 600, some lady wants to replant a forest, and, well, we have the technology. We can rebuild it. It just requires leaving Robo behind for fucking 400 years. He's a robot, so he can physically handle it, and he's not technically a person, so is this okay? Man, that's a long-ass time. Doesn't artificial being making such a large sacrifice mean less than if it were a person? Does it mean more? I don't know. Robo gets another quest in the future, and it's the most dick cheese part of the entire game. It feels like a bizarro ROM hack bootleg thing. It's the fakest seeming bit of the entire game. The dungeon concept is unlike any other challenge in the whole game. It is to physically run around to get these switches to open doors while you still have an electrical charge. Like a time-based racing game for just this one part. And I'll even say it works better here than going against Johnny. There's another wall here which needs to be walked behind, just like that one in the sewer I complained about earlier, though technically this is an optional quest, so I suppose it's better to be cryptic here than there. Then a pink Robo comes out claiming to be his fucking girlfriend. What? And that Robo's name is actually Prometheus, and that he's been on a mission this entire time to infiltrate the humans so they can destroy the entire race? What? If I didn't somehow know about this, like I had played Chrono Trigger this many times and just never found this quest, and someone tried to tell me about it, I would tell him to get the fuck off my parents' property because that's way too stupid for this game. But here it is. Again though, the plight is relatable. Have you ever felt like you're defective, like the way you turned out was somehow wrong because of some artificial bullshit expectations placed on top of you? Like you've been abandoned and might as well just get beaten to a pulp. Robo's stupid girlfriend is his redemption moment from earlier when he was unable to fight back against those clones. Chrono Trigger's character stories are about moving on, how your past baggage does not define you, and it doesn't have to define your future. You don't need time-traveling superpowers to make amends with your dad. You don't need time-traveling superpowers to treat your dead comrade with respect. You don't need time-traveling superpowers to break up with your toxic friends, but you do need time-traveling superpowers to stop your mom from being crippled in a machine, so what do I really know? That the game is almost over, because all that's left is the Black Omen, by far the biggest bastard in the entire game. A super dungeon designed to make you powerful enough to finish off Lavos. Design-wise, it is nothing. The game is completely out of dungeon tricks. It is a giant hallway with a fuck ton of battles. Bringing Isla is almost cheating because of all the overpowered crap she can charm off even just the regular monsters. I'm talking the best equipment equipment in the entire game, stat increasing tabs, mega elixirs, which restore the entire party's HP and MP. My final party for the entire endgame ended up being her, Chrono, and MAGUS. Unoriginal, but I don't care. There's really no wrong option. You can make anyone as overpowered as you want. Then at the end is the boss rush to end all boss rushes. Queen Zeal is more annoying than anything. She just tries to steal your MP. The Mammon Machine, because this thing can fight too, I guess. He's easy as fuck though, non-fight. Queen Zeal Part 2 will kick your ass, because the whole game they've been setting you up for this. In every other three-pronged battle this entire game, the strategy was to take out both appendages, then and only then focus on the head. But here, it's reversed. Attacking the hands results in devastating counterattacks that will kill you. Next is Lavos' boss rush form, where it will cycle through a bunch of previous fights with the exact same stats they had before, so most of them die in one hit. My first playthrough as a kid, I used to keep fighting Lavos over and over again at the end of time, just to get a sneak preview of whomever the next boss was going to be. Then I would pog out when getting to that next part in the game. This form is like getting a small taste of New Game Plus before actually finishing the game. Then it's the Lavos form we fought when Chrono fucking died, except not really, it's much weaker here. That Ocean Palace Lavos form is tough even at extremely high levels. Playing through the game naturally, you're going to be between 45 and 50 after one playthrough, and that's not nearly enough to beat the Ocean Palace form, but it's more than enough for this incarnation of Lavos. Our party then goes inside of him to kill it from within, where they meet this fucking thing. Having status immunity is paramount for these last two forms, because that's the difference between winning and losing. Before the final form, depending on who you have with you, your party will say a bunch of shit, which I have seen as interpreted as some revelatory, oh, so Lavos was actually the cause of all human achievement sort of twist, which is never how I read it. Luca has probably the most elaborate things to say here, stating that all of humanity's art and science were to meet the needs of that beast. Marley questions, it's the reason we're all here. Frog, it's too much to bear. We have been reared like farm animals. Our lives hath been for naught. I have always just taken these statements to mean that the thing was sucking on the planet like a parasite. In the Black Omen, there are clones of each of the party members in test tubes, presumably with data being fed to Lavos. I think of this thing as more of Cell from Dragon Ball than I do as literal God. Anyway, this fight was another setup, because the whole game, and in every other game in fact, the huge guy in the middle would be our target, but in this case, it's actually the little nugget on the right. This right here is Lavos, so we kill the left pod to lower the shields, cast Luminire and Dark Matter a whole bunch of times, and kaboom! The game ends.
Oh, goodness me. It's 3 a.m. What are you still doing up? Man, I mean, I guess the video's not quite over. Now that you beat Lavos, what happens next obviously depends on what ending you get. Chrono Trigger is famous for having 12 different endings, but that's not entirely true. You see, there are 12 different ending set pieces, but there are variations on side of those endings, and most of them are gags that you can only get in New Game Plus anyway. There's really only 2 realistic endings you can get after playing through the game casually, and that's either Chrono is alive or Chrono is dead. But let's be real, you're not going to get Chrono is dead. You're going to get Chrono is alive, and the 2 main variations on that are whether or not you crashed the epoch into Lavos. Most players, I think, go through the Ocean Palace, so they get the ending where some buffoonery happens at the end. There's like a time portal, and your mom goes in, and it's wacky, wacky adventures. I prefer the one where you crash the epoch in, so that one ends with you and Marley on balloons flying away. That's the true ending, but oh man, yeah, you should really go to bed, man. It's 3 a.m. I'll see you in the morning with my final thoughts. All right, so this is the end. This is the end of Chrono Trigger. It's almost the end of the video, but I do have some closing statements. I think I can distill the reasons this game works so well into 4 things. The first one is that this game had so many people working on it. Legend goes, the legends of the development goes, that once they got the big 4, the Dream Team guys on board, they then just went around asking everybody at Enix and Square and various teams whether or not they wanted to work on the game, and the result was an overwhelming number of people did. So this game had a huge staff, which also for the time, staff basically equaled budget. More people working on the game means more money being spent on it. It would not surprise me if Chrono Trigger was the biggest budget Super Nintendo game, aside from like the ones that were developed hand in hand with the system, I guess if you want to include development costs. So as a result, it feels like a premium big budget game. There's got a lot of sprites, it's got a lot of set pieces that are only used once, just really to have fun. Think of like the shoe in Mario 3. They included that because it's fun. It's a one-off thing, it's never mentioned again. Chrono Trigger's chocked full of stuff like that. Screens you never see again, sprites you never see again, moments, animations, just assets that exist just to sell one specific thing. That was very uncommon in the Super Nintendo era, and Chrono Trigger's got it in spades. The second reason, I think, is because they chose to open it up. They didn't go traditional Dragon Quest, they didn't go traditional Final Fantasy. They didn't go with the grid, you can move in all directions. The fact that it feels freer than your standard JRPG opens up the doors. It makes it appeal to a broader audience. So they normied it up a bit, which is fine. There's nothing really wrong with that. In fact, I think it helps lead into my third point about why Chrono Trigger is so great. It's because I think this is the first JRPG I've ever played where everything felt purposeful. Everything in Chrono Trigger feels like it was placed there by an artiste, by a game design artiste for a specific reason. It's very seldom you can point to anything in Chrono Trigger that doesn't tie into anything else, that doesn't exist to further a character or a story moment or anything. In fact, like Johnny is pretty much like the only thing I could come up with, and maybe like 1 or 2 other things that I mentioned in this video. And the fourth, maybe even the most important, but easy to overlook, it's a beautiful, gorgeous game, and it sounds amazing too. Graphics and sound aren't everything, but they leave a hell of an impression. So, yeah, Chrono Trigger, greatest RPG ever, probably. Pound for pound, like, at least for the era, I can't think of, like, I've played 55 Super Nintendo RPGs all the way through before getting to this one. And I don't think I've played this one since starting this whole show, right? And as I said, I went through them all, and nothing even really comes close to the craftsmanship. I think that's the key, the craftsmanship of Chrono Trigger. So, as always, that's all I got. Shout out to the patrons. Never trust anyone who needs a haircut. Goodbye.